The name of our protagonist is Gangwoo Choi, who is just a generic anime student. Okay, maybe not exactly ordinary, but more like a lonely otaku. It was better for him to be this way than to be out with other people. Or at least that was what Gangwoo wanted to believe, because he was always alone like this. He spent his time playing fighting games and celebrating his victories, perhaps because he had always been gaming throughout his life. For some reason, his gaming skills were the best of all, and yet he didn't feel completely lonely even now. He had a friend he could talk to about his games from time to time. That person was on the other side of the room, a guy talking with others. Or at least that's what it should have been, because that same guy was making threats to a student. He grabbed the student's console and hit him on the head, questioning if he wasn't tired of this. The student stammered in return, asking for it back immediately. He was in a very important part of the game and got distracted. This left the irritated student making threats and questioning his attitude. His classmates started kicking his table too and causing trouble. In the process, the student's console ended up getting turned off, but they hadn't done it on purpose. They should never have known that this would happen. The student began to tremble, asking how he dared to do such a thing. He stood up furious because they turned off his console in the middle of the game when he was about to pass the level. They shouldn't even know how hard he had worked to get there, and he wouldn't forgive them for that. The boy charged at the one making threats, who was caught off guard by his courage. The others began to beat up the student, knocking him off his table, claiming that he didn't even understand his own place there. That was why otakus were all hated, and they started hitting him on the ground. Gangwoo just watched this scene, which was a common class behavior. He had this one friend, not the one making threats, but the one who was suffering now. At the end of classes, the two left to go home from school. Gangwoo asked if his friend was okay because he saw him being picked on a little earlier. He replied that he was fine. That was the kind of thing he was used to. He didn't care about being beaten up, he was more worried about his game. This brought a laugh from Gangwoo. He couldn't tell if he was relieved or not. The friend knew he should go home and check if his save was still intact. The protagonist said he could play again if he lost his save. His friend agreed, asking if he intended to head in the same direction as always. And the protagonist agreed, asking his friend not to let his guard down on the way back. The two said goodbye, and Gangwoo continued walking through the city on his own. He was also a lonely gamer who just spent his time like that. But still, he wondered why Hyunjun was the only one being threatened. The protagonist didn't know if it was because they found his reactions funny. Even Gangwoo needed to stop at game stores on the way back. That was when he saw a sign saying there was space for rent. This made him run out, wanting to know what happened for the store to put up its rental. When he opened the doors, a woman inside the store recognized Gangwoo. He greeted the owner, who told him they were closed that day. But he still wanted to know what was happening because the store should have been doing well. That was when the owner decided to put the store up for rent for some reason. She explained that it just happened to be necessary. The following week, she had a goal. Gangwoo wondered if she had managed to get all the money she needed. Even if that were the case, the protagonist felt sad because she closed her store like this. After all, he had been going there since he was in elementary school. He always stopped there several times on his way back from school to have fun. But it was true, she was disappointed too to have to close the store, because she knew Gangwoo was one of her regular and loyal customers. But now he had grown up properly and seemed focused on his studies. The protagonist laughed a little at those words. There wasn't much there. He had almost all the games in the store and wondered what he could finally get. And she replied that many things had been sold over the weekend, and she hadn't had the opportunity to restock considering she was going to rent the place. In that, she asked if he would like her to recommend a new game. Gangwoo was surprised. After all, he was quite aware of most games. So the owner explained that it was about a mobile game. The protagonist was surprised because she could sell those things in her store. Normally, people would download games on their phones instead of selling them in stores. She also explained that it wasn't a game typically sold. He could only download it because he had the QR code available. This game was called Real World Mobile. She handed him the QR code to scan so he could download it and see what it was like. Gangwoo was surprised, but he ended up doing as the owner asked. She soon realized he thought he was installing it and asked him to go home and try it, thanking him again because Gangwoo stopped by her store on his way home. That was how he said goodbye to the game store that had been part of his entire childhood. The game he received as a farewell gift from the store owner was that one. Gangwoo had no idea how much this game could turn his life upside down. When he got home, he announced his arrival and his mother welcomed him. She asked him to change and come down to eat afterward. In his room, he sighed when he realized he was quite tired after classes. But before anything else, he decided to check out the new game that had come out. Real World Mobile was one that all its developers guaranteed would be fun. The protagonist wondered what kind of game this exactly was. Upon opening it, he was greeted with the congratulations for entering as player 96. A tutorial would begin to explain how the game worked. The tutorial mission shouldn't be complicated, but rewards and penalties would apply. The first mission was to drink water within an hour, and you would earn rewards. If he failed this mission, about 3 cups in his house would break. Gangwoo Choi was surprised because the reward for this mission was $8. It didn't take long for the mission to start, but Gangwoo Choi still didn't know what to do. This was because there were no buttons on the screen, just a countdown. In the end, Yang decided to set this aside and go down for dinner. In the living room, his family was having fun watching television and distracting themselves. His mother approached with cups of strawberry milk, but suddenly she twisted her ankle and the 3 cups fell to the floor, breaking immediately. They all jumped in shock and ran to see if their mother was okay. Gangwoo was somewhat shocked by what he had seen while his sisters helped her. He didn't want to believe that the game had really made the penalty come true. But when he looked, about an hour had passed since the mission started. His family decided to stay to help their mother after she fell and clean up the mess. His sister saw him daydreaming and told him to stop staring, but Gangu was still distracted with his thoughts after everything, until she shouted in his ear for him to wake up and get out of his thoughts. Then he ran out while receiving a lecture from his sister for being in a rebellious phase. Back in his room, the protagonist rushed to grab his phone right away. When he looked, the game notified him that his daily mission was available. Upon opening the notification, a bright flash of light blinded him for a moment, and suddenly a girl named Rika appeared before him, the guide in charge of real-world mobile. Gangu was confused, but Rika could see that he had failed his tutorial. So 3 cups in his house were broken as a result of the penalty. The penalties in this game were always applied in real life, so he needed to stay alert. As expected, the protagonist was correct about the things that happened. Rika explained that if he failed 20 more missions, he would end up with a game over. In that case, he would no longer be able to enjoy the fun of the game. He would still have 5 missions per day to complete, so he needed to keep an eye on that. That said, she finished explaining the game rules to him. Then she said goodbye to the protagonist, ignoring his pleas for her to wait. Gangu then shouted that she was an idiot, and to his surprise, the girl stopped moving. She turned around angrily, giving him a real scare that made him jump. Then Rika forced a smile and said goodbye again, disappearing from the screen. At this point, Gangu was wondering if this was really a normal game. After all, breaking cups in his house and influencing real life shouldn't be common, and it still seemed like the character on the screen could really hear his words. The protagonist decided to search on Google about the game. He ended up realizing that there were no results regarding Real World. It was the same across all other search apps on the internet. He wondered how that could be possible. Maybe Gangu should have deleted the game for good. That's when he remembered the store owner and that he should ask her about the game. So Gangu got ready to go out while his sisters complained about him. After doing nothing when his mother fell, he still had the audacity to leave. He apologized, but something urgent came up to resolve right now. Leaving them behind, Gangu ran through the streets to get to the store. He wondered why the owner had recommended that ridiculous game. He needed to find her and get answers to his questions. Suddenly, his phone notified him that he had a new daily mission to complete. Gangu was startled but stopped to check the message and notification. Rika greeted him, saying that another mission had come for him to do. This time it would be different from the tutorial. He failed the mission and received a penalty, and losing a life was the penalty, so he needed to be very careful. To start, his first mission was to confess to his crush. Gangu was shocked by that mission, but Rika continued to have fun. After all, he would only have 1 hour to complete this mission. If he could complete it, he would gain a centimeter in height. But if he failed, one of his family members would end up having an accident that caught him completely off guard because that was a huge penalty. Anyway, Rika ignored his protests and let the mission begin for real. The protagonist still couldn't believe that something like this was true. This was because the girl he liked and needed to confess to was one of the delinquents at school. He liked her a lot, but she was way too intimidating to approach. Gangu thought he would end up dying of embarrassment along the way. Anyway, there was no way this game could be that real. The breaking glasses must have been a coincidence. He still wouldn't believe it. But even so, a part of him couldn't pretend it was completely fake. The idea of someone in his family getting hurt made him quite worried. For now, the protagonist decided he would confess to his crush Jizun. He had never confessed to anyone in his entire life, but still he would try even if his crush at school was a delinquent. Not only that, Gangu was about to have problems because he didn't even have her number. The only number he had from his classmates was Hyen's, and he doubted that Hyen would have Jizun's number to help him. But there were no other options now. For now, he would just head to school. Maybe he could find an emergency contact list that would help him. Still, he questioned why things had come to this point. Running, Gangu quickly passed by other people on his way to school. Finally, he arrived at school even though he was exhausted. He rushed past and the boys who used to threaten him saw him. They recognized him and wondered why he was at school at this hour. Gangu was always alone at school, but his loneliness really bothered him. Despite that, they felt it would be too much work to provoke him that much. They could just go play billiards. Gangu didn't seem like the type to give entertaining reactions. It seemed that no one was as fun to provoke as Hyen was for them. The protagonist ran and found the emergency contact list to use. Gangu knew he should have paid more attention. He never realized he was on the podium the whole time. He soon found the contact for his crush Jizun Ayam, making him nervous immediately. Now that he was about to call her, he was getting a bit more anxious. Gangu couldn't do it. He didn't even know how he should face her after this. He hadn't even talked to her during school. He only saw her from a distance. Even so, he was going to have the nerve to confess to her. It seemed absurd. Suddenly, while he was having a crisis, a voice questioned what he was doing there. It was a guard who came to alert him that the school was closing now. Gangu was startled and apologized to the guard for taking his time. However, he memorized Jizun's phone number to call later. Leaving the school, he decided he should make the call anyway. It was said that a member of his family would end up having an accident otherwise. So Gangu was trying to convince himself that he should do this even if it hurt. It was for the sake of his family, but he was still too nervous to take the first step. Finally, after a moment, Gangu decided to make the call timidly. He asked if it was Jizun's number, and she replied yes, wanting to know who it was. The protagonist apologized, stammering because he called her out of the blue, and he introduced himself saying they were in the same class, but Jizun didn't remember him. Gangu was shocked because she didn't even remember his existence. Then he laughed, explaining that he was the guy who was always playing at the back of the class. It was likely that she would never notice him, and Jizun finally remembered. After all, he was the otaku of the games, questioning how he got her number. Nervous, Gangu tries to explain himself, but as he was taking too long, Jizun got irritated, telling him to hurry up and just tell the truth until Gangu shouted that he liked her. After a long silence, she tried to respond, but the call had dropped. He thought that even a loser like him could recognize a beauty like her, But it was still fun. Jizin wondered if she could use this to her advantage. So she made a call to the guys who were making threats at school. After hearing that they were playing billiards, she refused to go with them, claiming that a guy had just confessed to her right now. This irritated him, and Jizin had fun because she was becoming too popular for his liking. She thought he had confessed even without knowing she was taken, which was quite clear, but he still wanted to know the name of the idiot who did that. Jizin tells about the weird guy at the back of the class who was always playing. The guys making threats got furious upon hearing this. Gangu looked like he wanted to die. The two were ready to end this guy's life the next day. Meanwhile, Gangu was dying of a heart attack after managing to confess. Still, he managed to complete his first mission for better or for worse, but there was no way for him to know what would come next due to such an attitude. He knew it was just a game, but Gangu had really managed to confess. But it turned out he ended the call suddenly. Jizin didn't even try to call back. He tries to convince himself it was normal because she would never do that after all. Now was not the time for that. Gangu should head to the game store to find the owner. He even forgot because of the mission, but that was his main objective. The protagonist ran out but ended up facing a closed store. Not only that, but the store was perfectly empty after she had left. Incredibly, Gangu wasted too much time focused on his mission. He still had so many questions to ask about the game he received. Sighing, the protagonist decided to go home completely defeated. His sister immediately complained because first, Gangu left home without caring, even with her mother having gotten hurt and glass all over the house. And then he came home so late without caring about anything else. The protagonist apologizes again, but he knew she didn't understand what he went through. His mother asked his sister to calm down because she hadn't even hurt herself that much. Still, the sister insisted that Gangu should understand a bit about real life. He always got stuck playing and didn't care about anything else around him. Gangu tried to retort that it wasn't true and wanted to walk away when his sister approached. But then she noticed there was something different about him for some reason. A minimal change that at first she couldn't define what it was. The protagonist was confused about what he had in mind to act this way. Then she comments on how Gangu seemed a bit taller than usual. They used to be the same height before, but suddenly he was taller. Now that she thought about it, their mother ended up agreeing that he looked taller. Even though he was still young, there was still room to grow for a while. Still, his sister found it super weird because this should come gradually. But Gangu grew in the blink of an eye, which was super suspicious. The protagonist stammered nervously that they were making a mountain out of a molehill, and he retreated to his room deciding he would sleep because he didn't want anything to do with this. Anyway, now Gangu was questioning what exactly that stupid game was. The next day, he decided to go out to school just like his sisters. He hadn't even managed to sleep well the night before, his head was still a mess. His other sister commented, still surprised because Gangu was indeed taller. She hadn't noticed before because she had always been shorter, and the protagonist sighed. After all, it wasn't anything they should worry about that much. Another girl quickly appeared, saying they should all go to school together. The girl was a friend of his younger sister and greeted the protagonist. She decided she would walk alongside Gangu and said goodbye so they could see each other later. Gangu felt that at least things were working out for now. He wanted to be alone anyway. Now he could clear his mind. Suddenly, a voice approached, asking if he really thought he would stay alone. It was one of the guys making threats, laughing because Gangu seemed quite busy. The delinquent commented that he had recently heard Gangu confess to Jizin. Even the protagonist had completely forgotten about that because he focused on the game. Gangu made his way to school accompanied by the delinquent. He laughed at him because a loser had the courage to hit on the girl. Even the protagonist didn't know how he found the courage to say that. However, the delinquent mentions that Jizin was actually Daeong's girlfriend all this time. Daeong, the guy who made threats with his friend Hyeon, was quite scary. Gang froze in shock. He had never known this all along. After all, he always had his face glued to the screen of his games and stopped paying attention. At that moment, the protagonist replied that he didn't know this when he confessed. And the delinquent responded that he knew because he should have gotten into trouble by picking a fight with him. After all, Daeong was the boss of the fights at school. It was indeed shocking. Although the guy was praising him, Gang replied that it was just another misunderstanding. It didn't take long for Daeong to start looking for him to get revenge. The delinquent gave Gangu a pat on the back to wish him good luck. However, Gangu was sure that things would only get more problematic. It wasn't good at all. For now, he should focus on skipping school and running away. He would end up getting killed for real if he was careless and ran into the guy. However, Gang received a notification saying that a new mission was available. This infuriated him because that damn game was wasting his time. He had no way to distract himself now. It was a matter of life or death. But Rika didn't care about his worries and greeted Gangu just the same. She was all smiles, even seeing the protagonist with that loser look on his face. It was a very simple first daily mission for a student like him. The first thing he should do was pay attention in his first class and not fall asleep. Gangu couldn't believe the audacity of that game assistant. She was laughing at Gangu and how he would go through tough times at school because of her. It was the hardest mission of all time, but Rika assured him he would receive rewards for it. If he failed the mission, his younger sister would have an accident later. Gang realized that this game was really cursed for putting so much pressure on him. The penalties were always extreme to extreme in his opinion. Rika ignored his complaints and wished Gangu good luck to pass the mission. Now he had no choice but to make the mission work and couldn't skip it. It didn't take long for Gangu to return to school still very worried about his life. Around him, students were whispering and gossiping about something. It was about the class loser who confessed to Jizin after all. The guy who only played badly was suddenly noticed for doing something bold. This caused all kinds of commotion and everyone knew Daeong was furious. Gang felt like he was going to go crazy with the rumors spreading like this. It didn't take long for Daeong himself to appear in the classroom, startling him. Other delinquents commented that they could go out to provoke the freshmen, but Daeong refused to do that now because there was something more important. He was in a bad mood. Even Hyein noticed that Gangu was worried about something. The first class started and the protagonist tried to concentrate, but it was complicated. Jizin was smiling and self-assured because she told her boyfriend. It didn't take long for the class to end, and the teacher reminded them to do their homework. When they were alone, the classmate approached Gangu. He told him to follow him because they needed to go somewhere else now. At the school exit, the protagonist ended up running into the delinquents. Some of them quickly made sure that the teachers wouldn't find out what was happening. Gangu was still trembling with fear when one of them approached to question him. They wanted to know why he confessed to Daeong's girlfriend. The protagonist tried to explain that he didn't know she was his girlfriend to begin with, but the students didn't care because thanks to Gangu, Daeong was the one who was angry. He was ruining the whole class's mood because of his actions. It didn't take long for the protagonist to get punched square in the face. Anyone would end up furious if some idiot confessed to their girlfriend. And now it was no different. Some girls were watching the scene laughing, including Jizin, who sighed about not wanting to talk about it now. They were commenting that Gangu was a true loser as expected. Still, it was strange because Jizin needed to tell her boyfriend about this. After all, she knew that telling Daeong was giving Gangu a death sentence. For Jizin, it was just fun. If anything, it was his fault for confessing. The girls were having fun. As expected from the cruel Jizin, she didn't care about anything. In parallel, Gangu was being beaten up like real trash. They were laughing because he was staying quiet even while being beaten. That weird guy was always sitting in the back playing alone. It was unbelievable that an idiot like that could say such things. Confessing to the girlfriend of the strongest and scariest guy in school was madness. They never considered that someone would have the capacity to do such a thing. As Gang remained quiet, they started hitting him even more to make him talk. They began to beat the protagonist like a sack of potatoes and without stopping. They laughed because Gangu was letting himself be beaten. He was just an idiot. The protagonist himself couldn't believe he ended up suffering so much for a stupid game. He wondered if he was scared enough to barely feel pain during the fight. The guys wanted Gangu to at least retaliate or cry to make it worthwhile. He should at least fight back to regain his reputation. Even when he was full of courage when he confessed in the past, he was still acting all scared now. He should at least try a little. Gangu just kept apologizing, unable to do anything in response. Then one of them commented that he had a new idea. They could do something different. Pointing to one of the guys on the side, if he could fight him and win, they would let him go. It seemed fun, but the guy who was challenged remained furious that such a thing happened. He questioned whether Gangu really wanted to fight him and if he could handle it. Even with the protagonist denying, they refused to accept his words. If he wasn't going to fight him, they would just continue beating him until he was a mess. They just wanted to make him braver than that. Gangu ended up being forced to turn against the guy and fight anyway. As the protagonist refused to raise his hands, he charged at him immediately. They were furious because the protagonist refused to try to fight back that much. At least this made Gangu raise his fists, while the others enjoyed seeing his resistance. As expected of a brave hero, they didn't intend to go easy on him. The protagonist was pressured by the punches from the student and pushed back. None of this was fair. Gangu wondered why he had to go through this. Jizin just watched, laughing, and his classmate was recording the whole scene, smiling. Gangu began to get furious, questioning why they were doing this to him when he hadn't even done anything. It didn't take long for him to push his opponent away. They all froze in surprise because the guy flew away like paper. He was still trembling in place after pushing the guy away, but then he noticed what he had just done with his own strength so suddenly. The others were left confused about what they had just seen before their eyes. Gang turned to the others and one of them quickly ran away, asking for help, just like all the others who didn't want to end up in his hands as a consequence. In that moment, the protagonist realized that something had changed again. When he ran to his phone and checked the game, he discovered he had completed the mission. The game rewarded him with an increase of 1 point in his strength. It was probably because of this that he managed to make the guy fly away with a push. Half shocked by everything that had happened, the protagonist ran away from there. In the park, he paused to process all the things that had happened so far. It was all because of that game. His strength increased by 1 point. Still, the amount of strength he put into a push was enormous. Suddenly, Gangu managed to become too strong even without feeling any difference. This made him want to test his strength, maybe by kicking a tree and checking the changes. Even though he had gotten stronger, a big heavy tree shouldn't suffer from this. He approached the tree thinking that he had never fought anyone in his life. In fact, he hadn't even hit a punching bag to train. Gangu hoped he wouldn't end up breaking his fist or anything like that in the process. Taking a deep breath, he calmed himself so he wouldn't be too nervous. All he needed to do was kick the tree. Nothing too serious would happen. He would just give it a gentle kick and check his strength, and so he did. But to his surprise, the tree simply broke in half, but it didn't fall. The people around looked in his direction, not understanding what Gangu was doing. Realizing this made him run away screaming. It was shocking that he almost destroyed that tree. If he had hit his opponent before with his fist, the result would have been destructive. Gangu could have become a killer. This scared him quite a bit. He was too focused on the missions because the penalties were very harsh, but he still needed time to understand what exactly that game was. He could end up getting involved in a big incident if he acted without thinking. When he saw his stats in the game, his strength had only increased by 1 point. Normally in a game, you could have seen the details on a status screen. Gangu noticed that there were also things related to a dungeon. He became curious to press the button and find out what would happen. But Rika appeared, warning that he should be at level 5 before entering the dungeon. In that case, he still couldn't enter it. which was expected. With that, he decided to check his stats in the game, which surprised him. Because the stats started in decimals, his current strength was 1.1. This meant that his original strength was only 0.1. That explained a lot about the strength jump he had before. After all, he had practically become 10 times stronger compared to how he was before. His stats were pretty bad when he looked now. His dexterity was 0.08 and vitality 0.05. Still, Gangu wondered if those numbers were really correct. He could understand the other stats, but there was no way his luck was 2 points. After all, he was just suffering so much because of that cursed game. Gangu still hadn't realized that the real reason for joining the real world to start was something much bigger than his mediocre luck, but it wouldn't take long. He would soon discover the ultimate truth behind the origin of this game. Meanwhile, Daeong was furious when he heard that Gangu had taken down a delinquent. Not to mention that all his other henchmen had fled scared like rats. They should be fired from being pickpockets given how useless they were. The guy stammered that Daeong was wrong. Gangu was stronger than he expected. Even so, Daeong couldn't believe it since it was 3 against 1 before, and yet they could only make excuses for their incompetence. The guys insisted that Gangu's strength was inhuman, hard to describe in words. Still, Daeong questioned what they were talking about because all of this was nonsense. He didn't intend to leave Gangu alone just because his men were bad at fighting. In fact, he decided that he would take care of that kid himself. Meanwhile, the protagonist walked away after skipping classes. He wanted to go home but ended up leaving his backpack at school after the fight. Anyway, as long as Gangu had this power, at least he wouldn't get beaten up. But he still didn't want to go to class. He was sure he would end up getting into trouble. With that, he decided he would just skip classes for now and walk alone. Suddenly, the protagonist received a call asking where he was. The person on the other end was Daeong, questioning if he wasn't going back to school. He couldn't just keep running away from the fight like a coward, especially after messing with someone else's girl so brazenly. Daeong knew that Gangu always got stuck in games, but it was a surprise. He never imagined that idiot could have enough strength to fight back, and he questioned if he had decided to muster the courage to hit on his girl like that. The other guy said that Daeong should stop because Gangu's strength was out of this world, but Daeong shouted for them to shut up because they were useless anyway. Then he ordered Gangu to go to the school rooftop right now, and it was better to hurry because he had his school backpack in hand. If he didn't want his precious things to be destroyed, he should go see him, or all his games and consoles would be destroyed and turned to dust. Gangu was startled because they were using his games as hostages. Daeong warned that if he didn't come back before class ended, he would deal with them. Moreover, he should know about his only friend Hyen, who always suffered threats. He would kick his butt so that everyone knows he became a pushover in his hands. Gangu questioned why they needed to involve him in all of this, but Daeong refused to answer, enjoying his desperation in the midst of it. Time passed, and the students went to class, with Daeong also heading to class. His classmates commented that they still thought he would have a hard time with Gangu. There was no way to take down someone with such great strength. They were terrified. They even wanted to find a way to stop Daeong before it was too late. It didn't take long for the students to see that Gangu had returned to class as well, and he apologized for taking so long. The teacher simply accepted his return without questioning. Hyen and Daeong stared at the protagonist when he arrived. Gangu was relieved because it didn't seem like they had gone after Hyen yet. At least the others saw that he decided to show up to confront the fight. Time passed and classes ended. It didn't take long for Daeong to approach Gangu. He questioned whether he decided to pick a fight, and the protagonist tried to explain. After all, it was just a misunderstanding, but Daeong told him to shut up, because he heard that Gangu had taken down Minsu a little earlier with a move. Still, he thought he could keep messing with his girlfriend like that. The protagonist tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, and Daeong mocked him because whenever things got messy, it was always a misunderstanding. Instead, he invited him to follow him because they should settle things on the roof. With no choice, the protagonist was taken to the roof where he would end up fighting him. It seemed there were several misunderstandings between them, but Daeong wasn't good with words, so he really didn't think they could make things work. They should settle things with their fists instead of talking. Daeong heard that Gangu had a really powerful punch and wanted to see it in action. Gangu asked if that would make him feel better, and Daeong replied that it was how he felt. But things had changed now because he had taken Minsu down. Since then, his 2 idiot followers had been too terrified of him, so Daeong wanted to experience the protagonist's techniques firsthand. At that moment, he charged at him like a bull ready to fight, and Gangu knew right away that he couldn't retaliate for now. When he thought about it, he was in the middle of something quite wrong. It would be better if he just let himself get beaten, and Daeong would be satisfied. It was thanks to the status he received as a reward, so Gangu shouldn't suffer. Or so he thought, but the first punch showed that he was going to feel a lot of pain. He couldn't believe it hurt to the point of needing to back off. He thought some delinquents were different from others, with more strength than usual. In that, Daeong was left confused if he didn't intend to retaliate in any way. After all, he was just taking the hits without intending to give back in kind. The others were watching the scene of Gangu taking the punches in turn, with Daeong challenging him to retaliate because otherwise he would end up suffering. And he almost forgot to mention, but he had already broken all of his consoles in his backpack. That really caught Gangu by surprise, and he sent Daeong flying away right away. It was an angry punch, and the fight came to an end. It was enough damage to break the wall, and all of this happened while 2 second-year students were fighting. People were shocked because something like that happened on the school roof. They hadn't even seen it in person, but many people were talking about the fight. It didn't take long for the protagonist to tell his family he was suspended from school. His sister shook him angrily, wanting to know how something like that happened. They couldn't even believe that their brother was capable of getting involved in this. Normally, Gangu wouldn't have gotten involved in something like this, but that's what happened. Even her mother was shocked because Gangu ended up getting into a fight. Even more impressed, his sister shook him after hearing that Gangu fought with someone. Not just once, but with several others afterward, and he asked her to let him go. That's why their mother was called to the school. Gangu almost felt dizzy, but his sister was being very observant as she noticed that he not only got taller, but he also gained some muscles and got stronger. She wondered if he had always been like this. She never noticed he was working out. Gang decided he would go to his room to rest a bit and moved away from her. He was a bit tired and his head was a mess after the earlier fight. Suddenly, he got hit on the head with a roll of toilet paper. It irritated him because his sister's attitude had been unbearable these last few days. She yelled because Gangu was ignoring the fact that she was causing problems for their mother. She went to school after having fought and didn't even try to explain herself. Gang realized she was upset because she didn't even try to apologize to their mother. Their mother seemed quite tired, sighing as she asked her daughter to stop. Still, all he could do was say he had no choice. He walked away while complaining because they always kept bothering him. His sister was somewhat shocked by this kind of reaction. He was really quite rebellious. Moreover, she could never understand him if he stopped talking to her. Even Gangu was frustrated because they didn't know anything about what happened. He was irritated because the pressure of the game made him do those things. Sighing, the protagonist lay down to try to rest a bit. Gangu knew he had no right to be angry with them because of this. He understood where those questions were coming from, even if they annoyed him. But he didn't even know what to do anymore. They wouldn't believe him if he told them about the game. He had been so stressed recently because of the game that he felt like he was going to go crazy. Suddenly, Gang received a new notification from Real World Mobile. On the screen, Rika appeared greeting the protagonist after a while. She praised him for completing all the daily missions so far without fail. Still, Gang retorted that anyone could do the missions with such bad penalties. Rika said he seemed determined to keep playing and would explain more details about the game. He can review the game rules on the explanation screen. The first thing all players in the real world should know was this: he could invite up to 3 other people to play with him. Gang was caught off guard, but Rika continued explaining this. The person sending the invitation could choose whether to accept participation or not. After that, they would become players of Real World Mobile, which surprised him. The second important rule was that the maximum number of users was 100. Once that number was reached, they could not invite more people. If a player left or was eliminated, a new user could be added. Yang realized there was indeed a limitation, which explained the screen he had seen before. After all, he was player 96 at the time he had entered. The assistant continued saying they could always check the number of players. They could also notice that Real World Mobile was only available in this country, so all participants in the game were Korean, and there would be no others. Now the final rule was how they could exit the game. Gang was curious to know about this, and Rika said that normally 1 to 5 daily missions were done. He would have a total of 20 life points, and the game ends when he loses all of them. Failing a mission would result in losing 1 life point. This meant he would need to incur about 20 penalties in total to exit. The end of the game also meant the end of his life as a player, and he could also simply leave the game whenever he wanted. This would finally conclude the explanations of the rules. Rika finished and said goodbye. Gang realized he could supposedly leave the game whenever he wanted, but then Rika decided to take advantage of being there to offer a new mission. He was to run 10 laps around the school field before the end of the day. Completing the mission would give him a total of $76 for his account. If he failed, one of his greatest treasures would end up being destroyed. Gangu became irritated by this because Rika said it and just left without further ado. The protagonist was still thinking about how he could leave whenever he wanted. Even so, he decided to go out and run as required by the mission. He did not intend to leave so soon. He had to finish the game at all costs. Normally, his own rule was to finish any game he had started. No matter how difficult it was, Gangu wanted to know how he would finish. As if he could finish that stupid game or lose to something like this. There were good things that would happen too. He grew taller and stronger. Gradually, Gangu began to gain more confidence in himself. While the protagonist was running, Daeong and his friend were watching. That damn Otaku wasn't a loser after all. He kept running like an idiot. The delinquents were surprised because Gangu was training like that, and they wondered if he was always doing these things every day. 5 days had passed since he was suspended from school. He felt it was indeed strange not to go to school when he wasn't there. But at least Gangu managed to complete his daily missions since then. And this involved doing some exercises according to the requirements. This allowed him to earn some rewards and levels from the missions as a consequence. The protagonist could choose to gain 1 status point every time he leveled up, but he ended up saving them since he didn't know it would be a good choice. In total, the protagonist saved 3 points, and then before he knew it, it didn't take long for Gangu to reach level 5, and Rika celebrated. Now that he reached level 5, he could freely visit the dungeon. He remembered seeing the dungeon button before but couldn't touch it. Now that Gangu thought about it, he hadn't been able to enter before. It was because of his level limitation, but now it was unlocked for use. He wondered what exactly he could find inside the dungeon. Usually, one would get a large amount of rewards for clearing a dungeon. At least that was how it worked in normal RPG games. Gangu wondered if he should give it a try. It could certainly be interesting. Maybe he could get even better rewards to use in real life. But he paused for a moment. This was a game he still didn't fully understand. It couldn't have been met with an even crazier penalty for entering the dungeon, especially when considering the penalties he had seen so far. If he ended up dying in the dungeon, he could really die in real life. With that in mind, Gangu decided that he would not enter. he had no reason to take such a risk. Despite that, he was really curious to know what the dungeon was. He was so curious that he couldn't even sleep, suddenly unlocking it. He couldn't help but want to take the test and see how far he could go. Gangu clicked to check what the dungeon was like, at least for a little while. He would take a look and then leave, so he decided to click on the dungeon. His current level was 5, and he would be teleported to a corresponding dungeon. In any case, he could leave right away if it seemed too dangerous. Trembling with fear, Gangu clicked the option and decided to enter the dungeon immediately. A bright light appeared on the screen to the point where the protagonist had to close his eyes. When he opened them, Gangu was suddenly in the middle of nowhere and had vanished from his room. He wondered where he had ended up and if this place was really the dungeon. Now he knew he had indeed been teleported inside it. It was truly madness. Gangu wanted to know how to get home when suddenly a change happened in front of him. A screen appeared alerting him that he could hunt 10 large brown bears within 10 hours. The mission would fail if the time limit expired or if the player died. In the end, the protagonist had no choice but to fulfill it. Suddenly, something exploded behind him, worrying him that it could be an earthquake. But when he looked, it was the brown bears approaching him to fight. Gangu was startled because these were real bears. It was different from a game. He realized he had to hunt 10 of those huge, threatening creatures, but he should be able to handle them considering his current stats. The bear immediately charged at him and Gangu hesitated, taking a hit and flying. That really hurt. He thought it didn't matter how strong he was. In the end, a bear would always slightly overpower a human's strength. It was certain that if it weren't for his increased strength by 1 point, he would have died by now. Now that he reflected on this, he still had those 4 points he had saved. It was the best opportunity to choose exactly how to use them. His body was still having difficulty moving after the hit he took earlier. The bears were still charging at the protagonist furiously. Since Gangu was almost out of life now, he had to strive to win. 1 point in dexterity and the other 2 in strength. That was what he decided to do. By a narrow margin, he managed to defend himself from the full attack that came his way. It was too close for his comfort, but at least the protagonist managed to survive. Now he had managed to adjust his stats before it got too dangerous. The bear was ready to take his life with just 1 move, but now it was different. Now he could fight back, even if he felt crazy for doing something like that. He became powerful with just 1 more point in strength. Now that he applied 2 more, it should be possible. Gangu soon got startled when he realized that his movements were also quite light. He could practically fly when he jumped. It was because he increased his strength point. Apologizing, he sent the bear flying away as if it were made of paper. They were trying to kill him, so he had no other choice at this point. But there was still another bear running towards him furiously. He still needed to defeat 9 more of them, and only 1 had been taken down. Thus began the new fight between him and the bears, taking hits and then hitting back. That made him fly even after increasing his stats. It still hurt to be attacked. Gangu needed to make sure he wouldn't lower his guard while taking them down. Taking them all at once would be difficult, so he needed to find a way to win. Determined, he ran across the terrain to lead the bears to follow him. As expected, they all had different physiques and speeds from one another. There was a difference in their speeds, and they were starting to separate because of it. Thus, Gangu managed to send the second bear flying away with a kick. The third, fourth, and fifth were also taken down shortly after. When it was over, all 10 bears were defeated, which exhausted him quite a bit. He had never moved so much in his life before. It was the first time. He seriously thought he would end up dying in the middle of it, but at least he managed to survive. The mission was a success, and now the game even asked if he wanted to return to the real world. He obviously wanted to go home quickly, so he pressed the agree button. It didn't take long for Gangu to return to his room, which was a true relief. What really caught him by surprise was that the pain of the bears ended up softening. When he picked up his cell phone, Rika congratulated him because he managed to finish cleaning the dungeon. Now he could enter the dungeon once a day and would receive new rewards. The reward of the day was a level increase in addition to receiving a wooden staff. Rika said he would have the chance to upgrade his set of weapons after cleaning the dungeon. This item could not be used in real life, only inside the dungeons. Then she said goodbye to the protagonist so she could later appear and talk about the other mission. Gangu sighed, then saw that a new mission had appeared on his phone screen. He was now supposed to make new allies and find other players from real-world mobile. It was complicated for Gangu because he didn't even have friends in real life. It would be impossible to make friends who were also playing this game. He was ready to give up on this mission for the first time and set it aside. This was because apparently there would be no direct penalty for not doing it, although he could gain experience as a consequence of making allies. During dinner, his family had to keep calling Gangu to wake him from his thoughts. They wanted to know what his problem was because he was so distracted and ignoring his mother. He was caught by surprise, and his mother said she was just wondering if he would go back to school. After all, his suspension would end the next day, and Gangu hadn't even remembered that. He laughed a little. There was nothing to prepare, he would just go back to school. And his mother sighed. It was a shock for her since she never expected something like this to happen. Lately, Gangu had been so focused on his missions that he forgot about school, but he was sure he wouldn't be targeted by threats again. Although it was somewhat scary, suddenly he received notifications that there was a new mission waiting. As always, the timing of the notifications was all quite bad. Gangu sighed, wondering what exactly the mission was this time. With that, he quickly finished eating his breakfast to the shock of his family. Then he left the dishes there and thanked them for the meal to hurry and leave. His sister complained because he was so rude and ate so fast. Even so, his mother gestured for Gangu to go, without worrying. The sister complained because she was always spoiling her son, instead of trying to question why he was acting strangely. He was always walking around with his cell phone and then disappearing after seeing it. The other sister suggested it could be a girlfriend, which surprised them. There was no way, but the sister believed it should be an obvious thing. It could only be a girlfriend waiting for his call all this time. Currently, his mother was thinking the same thing, which was surprising. His mother didn't want to eavesdrop, but she saw Gangwoo talking to himself in his room. She noticed it was a woman's voice and since then theorized it was a girlfriend. This left her surprised, but it was expected because her son was growing up. Normally, Gangwoo was a loner who always seemed lonely. Somehow, miraculously, he got a girlfriend, so his mother was happy. Even his complaining sister calmed down, he was leaning on someone after all. Finally, he was growing up in life. Now she could understand his time on the phone. The mother agreed that they should all be more understanding and patient with him. In parallel, Gangwoo went to his room to see what the new mission given by Rika was. Time passed, and the protagonist's suspension ended, allowing him to return to school. However, the atmosphere when he returned seemed quite different from normal. Sighing, he saw people murmuring about him and moving away in fear. It was all because of what happened with Daeong, and the other delinquents were running from him. They fled desperately after seeing the protagonist terrified. Still, Gangwoo never had friends to begin with. Now he was being avoided for a reason. His teachers were equally shocked. After all, he had always been so quiet. Always sitting in the corner and playing, they never imagined he would leave a classmate in the hospital. Gangwoo apologized to his teacher because he ended up causing so many problems. But it had been years since a student at the school had been suspended. She hoped he hadn't caused more problems for anyone. Next time, the teacher hoped he wouldn't do anything that would cause a suspension, and he tended to agree with her. He just wanted a peaceful and quiet life. Without any incidents until his graduation, it didn't seem like he would need to worry at least. The student council also took that incident seriously. They thought even the president wanted some time to talk to Gangwoo. He should head to the student council room as soon as possible to do that. The protagonist ended up sighing. He never imagined any of this would be necessary. On the way, however, he ended up crossing paths with Daeong. He was startled to see him, but Daeong just asked how things were going. He never imagined he would end up being defeated by an otaku like him. In fact, he had never even lost a fight in his life, not even against superiors or boys from other schools. Gangwoo laughed nervously, wanting to know if he had at least improved after that. The truth was that Daeong never imagined he would be humiliated in front of his friends. He was so furious that he even kicked Gangwoo in the face, but he stood perfectly still. That shocked Daeong, who couldn't understand what kind of person he was. Gangwoo nervously laughed again, pretending not to know what he was talking about. But Daeong was incredulous at the shameless way he was pretending. Obviously, a normal person would never take a kick to the face and remain standing. Still pretending, the protagonist mentioned that he had to go to the student council, and he ran off apologizing, leaving the other behind after that. Daeong was furious. He saw no chance of getting rid of him until graduation. Heading to the student council room, the president was waiting for him. Shi Kim, the president of the student council and one of the players of Real World Mobile. She was waiting for Gangwoo to arrive so they could talk. After a while of running, Gangwoo checked to see if he had stopped being followed. When he thought about it, Real World Mobile was indeed an amazing game. He had practically become a superhuman after leveling up and gaining points. Then he remembered that he should head to the student council room this time. Meanwhile, the delinquents were walking and talking about Gangwoo. They didn't know he intended to return to school so soon. They didn't even know that a kid like him was capable of fighting like that. They were hoping Gangwoo wouldn't come looking for revenge or anything like that. If they ended up being hit by him, they would probably end up dead. This made the two sigh. They would need to stay quiet until graduation. Their lives had always been tough. They just ended up in the same class as the weirdo. Even thinking he was a loser they could ignore, that was the outcome. Or rather, he wasn't a complete loser because he still had that friend. The other loser kid was Hyun-jun, who was always in his corner. The delinquents wanted to take out their frustrations and thought about doing it on him. They couldn't take down Gangwoo, but they could do it with Hyun. The two approached Hyun and slapped the back of his neck right away. He just looked at the delinquents with that look that said they were stupid, which irritated them. Hyun was acting all tough now that his friend was back at school. But to their surprise, Hyun dodged the punch that came next. It was so much shocking that suddenly he was able to act this way. The others started laughing because he couldn't hit an idiot like that, and this was starting to make him look bad after all. Hyun said that was enough. He was trying to focus on his game now. Enraged, the delinquents shouted because they were being ignored. It was all because Gangwoo had returned, or maybe he was feeling lucky for avoiding the punch. Suddenly, Hyun stood up and caught the new punch that came from the delinquent. Even the other delinquent charged at him, and he simply sent him flying too. The two were completely defeated by Hyun in front of the students. They couldn't even believe what happened, but Hyun had suddenly gotten strong. The truth was that he had also become a player after a while. Meanwhile, Gang finally arrived at the student council room. In fact, he had never been there and probably never thought he would until graduation. Gang was nervous and took a deep breath to gather courage and enter the room for good. Knocking on the door, the person inside said he could come in. He entered, asking for permission and apologizing for taking so long to arrive. Kim smiled when she saw the protagonist. She had been waiting for his arrival for a while. Right away, Gangwoo apologized for causing that incident earlier. He would make sure not to cause any more problems until his graduation. She was surprised because she hadn't called him there to talk about that. She just wanted to confirm one thing, and Kim asked if he was a player of Real World Mobile. That caught him off guard. Gangwoo asked what she was trying to talk about, but Kim retorted that she had a good intuition about this kind of thing. She could tell right away when she saw someone who looked like a player. Real World Mobile was the only explanation for the kind of strength he had now. Gang stammered that he didn't know anything about what she was talking about, which made her laugh. After all, it seemed like he was trying to hide. At this point, there was no point in doing that. Kim pushed Gangwoo against the wall in a rather frightening manner. While she was telling him that she was also a player, he threw himself to the side to avoid her. It was shocking that a girl could have such brute strength. She was having fun, and Kim was equally surprised because she didn't expect to see another player at school. Gangwoo also didn't think he would find someone like her, especially someone as strong as she was. Now that he remembered this, he had that mission to make allies. When he stopped, the protagonist noticed and took out his phone to check the mission. However, when he looked suddenly, it was marked as complete for some reason. Even though he had never added a friend before, Gangu wondered what had happened. Kim asked him what happened. After all, he just stopped in the middle of his sentence. He himself couldn't say what had happened until he saw that Hyeon was listed as his friend. Rika then appeared, congratulating him for completing the mission. As promised, a large amount of experience was offered as a reward. Thus, he leveled up and reached level 8, which surprised him. Kim asked what exactly he was doing to be so distracted. She wanted to receive a friend request notification, and Gangu asked how he could add her as a friend. In that, Kim explained that it would be the same as an SNS if someone was in his contacts. Then the real world would automatically add them as a friend in the game. He handed his phone to the president to do it herself. Gangu was wondering when his friend Hyeon became a player. Even with that other game store having closed, it was indeed strange. However, Gangu saw that Kim moved away from him and suddenly opened the window. She simply threw his phone away, which took him by surprise. The protagonist was startled, asking why she was doing that. Now he couldn't even see his missions if his phone was broken, much less the penalties. Or that was what Kim made him believe because she hadn't actually thrown the phone away. Gangu got annoyed because this was far from funny, playing with his heart like that. She returned the phone to the protagonist, commenting that she just wanted to play a prank. After all, it was very foolish of him to hand his phone to another player without thinking twice. If a malicious person broke his phone or something like that, he would have problems. He would end up facing penalties, and Gang realized he was indeed wrong. Kim warned him to be more careful if he encountered another player. There were several people who would consider him part of the competition. Gang asked why she returned his phone instead of breaking it. She said that other players would consider it a competition. But still, Kim decided to be nice and warn him about it. This made her laugh because after meeting him, she felt she didn't need to worry. Gangu was somewhat surprised because it sounded like some kind of compliment or something. After talking to him, it didn't seem like Gangu faced the delinquents to show off. He felt relieved at least because she was understanding his reasons. In any case, she decided that he could leave now that they had met. She just wanted to see what kind of person Gangu was and put her number in his phone. When he left the president's office, the protagonist let out a sigh. He never expected to meet another player so quickly, and to think that the student council president would be a player among so many people. But besides that, Gangu was happy because he could talk to someone about the game. Now that he thought about it, there was also Hyeon in his contacts. There was no way it could be a mistake. Now Gangu wanted to meet his friend and asked. Suddenly, he heard screams from people watching something happening outside the window. When he went to check, Gang realized it was Hyeon beating up two delinquents. The delinquents were charging at Hyeon, who was taking them down effortlessly. They all looked quite scared. He seemed like a monster, knocking them down one after another. After taking care of all the delinquents by himself, they wondered what was going on. Hyeon was not human to have such great strength in his fists. He replied that it was because he was called the loser otaku and a loner. It seemed that the blame was on them for underestimating others. They should be the guys who always push and pressure him. Now it must feel good to be beaten up by a loser otaku like him. The delinquents were suffering to the point of crying, and the others just watched in shock. Gangu was watching this and hearing the students asking him to stop. He didn't know what level Hyeon was at or what his stars were now, but the protagonist had only marked a tree by himself when he was at level 1. A player from the real world using their powers on a normal person could kill them, but Hyeon couldn't care less, just pressing the delinquents and questioning again and again if they were having fun with it. The delinquents kept crying and complaining while cursing at him so much, acting tough just because he had gotten a little stronger than usual. They even commented that they could go after his mother after all this, which only made Hyeon angrier, hitting them even harder than before. Suddenly, the one who jumped in to stop this from happening was Gangu. He wanted to know what his friend was doing, as he could really kill him like this. The other students were still somewhat in shock because he jumped from the high floor. Around them, all the other students were watching the scene somewhat surprised. Even with Hyeon wanting to know if the protagonist really jumped from above, Gangu replied that they could talk about that later. There was something more important now. After all, he was clearly trying to kill the delinquent by acting like this. He should know that hitting guys like that wouldn't just leave them with a few bruises. Hyeon asked if Gangu really wanted to protect that piece of trash. After all, it was Gangu himself who sent one of them to the hospital, and the protagonist laughed because he really didn't want to have done something like that. Still, Hyeon thought that if Gangu managed to take revenge on the delinquents, then he himself would also have the right to do so and take revenge. It was ridiculous, not to mention that Gangu was only threatened for one day, while Hyeon was threatened his entire life and humiliated in front of others. This made Gangu explain that he actually never did it out of his own will. He just ended up not controlling his powers well, not realizing how scary it was. Anyway, Hyeon told him to get out of his way because he was being a nuisance. He wanted to take revenge, but now couldn't help getting irritated by those words. Gangu still wanted him to stop because he was going a bit too far. He should know how long he suffered at the hands of those guys. Therefore, he would use the opportunity he received to kill all of them with his own hands. He was kicking all of them without worrying about anything else or the consequences. It didn't take long for Gangu to intervene and step in front to save the delinquent. Hyeon asked what that idiot was doing getting in the way, and he kept asking his friend to calm down and at least listen to him. If he ended up taking this guy's life, he would just have more problems than before. This irritated Hyeon because Gangu would never understand the pain he went through at their hands. Even Gangu just sat there watching while he saw him getting beaten every day. It was his right to take revenge. Even if Gangwoo called himself a friend, he never helped him. That's why he thought of him as a true hypocrite and kicked him away immediately. The protagonist got up even after that, with Hyeon wanting to hit the delinquent. Even after they had passed out, he intended to keep beating them until the end. They should reflect on their sins and have a good life in the afterlife. Gangwoo charged at his friend, trying to punch him, but Hyeon dodged. He knew his friend wasn't being himself right now. Gangwoo threw the unconscious delinquent at the other and told them to get out of there now. As the delinquents fled, Hyeon charged at the protagonist. The two began exchanging punches, with Hyeon asking if he couldn't understand. Among so many people, it should be Gangwoo who understood his anger, and yet he stood in his way. And the protagonist replied that he could understand, but needed him to calm down. They should at least talk about this before taking action. Hyeon ignored his words and continued charging at Gangwoo, furious. The other students just stood by watching this and recording this scene, impressed. They didn't understand what was going on with those two as they were fighting so fiercely. They almost looked like professional fighters, causing so much destruction. Even Daeon appeared to see what was happening in the middle of the courtyard and saw that Gangwoo was fighting again, quite surprised. He was even more shocked because Gangwoo was fighting Hyeon. Gangwoo threw his friend away, with Daeon wondering what he was seeing. Suddenly, Kim appeared, telling them all to stop this right now. If they continued causing problems for the school, she would kill both of them. Hyeon asked who she was, but if she got in his way, she would end up getting hurt. This made her angry because that was how he was speaking to a superior. He just told her to disappear because she was meddling in his life. Kim was surprised that a boy like him was acting like this towards her. Gangwoo asked him to calm down a bit because this was the president of the council. What made Hyeon grumble was that it was obvious she was being all bossy. But it seemed that Hyeon was the type who was always threatened all the time. Her comments only irritated him, but Kim mentioned that he wanted revenge. Right when he gained power and could say exactly what kind of person he was, which only gave him a headache. A person like that was called to the real-world mobile. This left Hyeon surprised because she knew about the game, but she took the opportunity to run and kick him hard. People could still hear him, and she made sure he was silenced quickly. Gangwoo ran to see if his friend was okay, but he had fainted on the way. Kim said he should take him to the infirmary and made sure he didn't cause any more trouble. Gangwoo agreed, hearing her say that they both should go to the council room after lunch. A little later, the protagonist took his friend to the infirmary to be treated. This was a ridiculous situation. Gangwoo never thought this could happen. He had been added to her friend's list not long ago. So the protagonist imagined that Hyeon must have become a player not long ago. Sighing at seeing his friend still asleep, he decided to check more on the game. Opening his friend's list, he saw that both Hyeon and Kim were still there. He wondered if anything would happen by clicking on his friend's picture. When he did that, Gangwoo was able to see his friend's entire character sheet within the game. It seemed he was still at level 2, clearly having started playing that day. He probably had barely completed a mission and leveled up. Still, he wondered how Hyeon managed to get into the game. Because after all, Gangwoo only got in by being invited by someone else via QR code. That's when suddenly Hyeon replied that he was also invited, which caught him by surprise. He mentioned that the shop owner also gave him the invitation link to play. Gangwoo soon saw that his friend had woken up, and he responded that he was still a bit dizzy, but he would probably be fine as long as he stayed still for a bit. That was a relief, but Gangwoo was curious to know more about it. Because the shop owner had disappeared and the game shop itself had closed some time ago. Hyeon agreed, but said it was before the shop ended up closing. It was on the day those delinquents broke his console while provoking him. In fact, right at the beginning, probably still on the same day as Gangwoo. There were signs everywhere in front of the shop saying it would be closing soon, so Hyeon ran inside before that could happen. It turned out that Hyeon managed to fix his console just by going to the shop. However, he couldn't fix it completely since the shop was closing. The owner apologized because it was the last day she was open with her shop, so she couldn't dedicate all of her time for that to happen. Instead, she suggested that she could offer him a fun game to distract himself, and that was when she passed on that invitation link for Real World Mobile. But he just ended up installing it and never opened it to check its content until then. He preferred to focus his time on the consoles and mobile games he was used to, which made the protagonist laugh because he identified with him in those preferences. While walking to school one day, Hyeon decided to try the new game. That game was really amazing. Completing a mission gave real rewards. Not only that, but he used it frequently to level up, and he ended up becoming ridiculously powerful after just a few missions. Gangwoo laughed in agreement because he understood well how that felt. But still, he didn't think it was right for him to try to kill his delinquents because of that, which made Hyeon protest because once again his friend was scolding him, even when he should have seen how much he had gone through all this time. Still, Gangwoo knew he was going too far to the point of almost taking their lives. This could have caused problems and left him living in jail for the rest of his life. Hyeon retorted that he was in control the whole time. People didn't just die because of that. Not to mention that it was Gangwoo who started trying to get revenge on others. The protagonist quickly tried to explain that it was all just a misunderstanding. Still, Hyeon thought it was a bit unfair that he was being so hypocritical. It wasn't long before a new voice appeared calling the losers in their lively conversation. It was Daeon who showed up saying they seemed to be having a lot of fun. Hyeon laughed because it was the perfect opportunity to settle some open business. But Daeon said they should leave that kind of thing for later, because he wanted to talk to both of them about something else. And he was supposed to know exactly what this so-called real-world mobile was that everyone was talking about. Gang realizes that he ended up overhearing their conversation during that time. Despite this, the two decided to ignore their issues and leave, changing the subject. Gang kept laughing and focusing on Haeyeon because it was more important for him to feel better. But Daeyeon insisted that they shouldn't act like complete idiots. He heard everything while he was outside the recovery room. Everything they talked about regarding getting rewards in real life and gaining powers. Gangu replies that they were just talking about a light novel and it wasn't real. And Daeyeon agrees that normally such a thing wouldn't be possible in reality. However, if you ask him, losing to an idiot like Gangu was unbelievable. And not just him, the two suddenly managed to take down several delinquents. In Daeyeon's opinion, the real-world mobile was starting to feel even more real. They were beginning to pressure the delinquents, and that infuriated him. Haeyeon questions if this guy wanted to die or something like that, which irritated Daeyeon because it seemed like they were looking for a fight. Gangu again tried to stop his friend from doing something he might regret, while Haeyeon was trying to remind him how miserable his life had been because of them. Daeyeon couldn't care less, it was his fault for being a loser, just irritating Haeyeon even more because he had always thought about killing him all this time. It might have just been fun for Gangu, but he felt like his life was going to be destroyed like this. Haeyeon just thought there was one thing he could thank Daeyeon for. If he hadn't broken his console, he wouldn't have been able to gain all that power. And Daeyeon sighed, still not knowing exactly what this so-called real world was. But it seemed like they really gained some kind of power because of it. On top of everything, Haeyeon himself started acting like a delinquent after getting stronger. They were now not much different from each other. In this case, if the situation were reversed, maybe he had become even crueler to other kids than they themselves were. It must be really nice to be in the place of a loser like him to justify himself. Haeyeon is getting really furious listening to those absurdities. Gang ran to hold him quickly, preventing him from charging at him. Even with Haeyeon eager to rush at Daeyeon at all costs and finish him off. At the same moment, Daeyeon took the opportunity to charge at them too, excited to fight. With Haeyeon taking a punch squarely, he returned another hit to Daeyeon's face. As Daeyeon thought, right now Haeyeon had superhuman strength. The two began exchanging furious blows with each other violently. Gangu could only watch, very worried because they were destroying the infirmary. Daeyeon was impressed because he was quite fast for such a big guy, even after becoming more powerful using the real world or whatever it was. In the end, Haeyeon was still very bad at fighting, and that was clear. Even the protagonist knew that Haeyeon was still quite weak with the game's power. After all, he had just reached the second level and had barely started playing since then. Putting aside the added point in agility, his other stats were the same. But more importantly, Daeyeon himself was an impressive person. His current awareness and sense of battle were worthy of note. It was no wonder he was considered the best delinquent in the whole school. Daeyeon sighed, if his attacks couldn't land, the fight would never go anywhere. In that, since he had gained an absurd strength even greater than normal. Maybe it was fair that he was using something to fight against him. Haeyeon charged at his opponent again, he was eager to defeat him. And Daeyeon dodged the punch that came his way, laughing at his attempts. Those were strong words for someone who had never fought back against what he had suffered so far. And so the delinquent hit Haeyeon with one of the infirmary tools. A weak person like him could never defeat an experienced person like Daeyeon. A person like Haeyeon was destined to be below him for his entire life. That was all he deserved because he was always acting powerful. He would take the opportunity to finish him off until he was eating dust after all. Moreover, maybe he could stop hitting him if he talked about the real world. Haeyeon was still convinced that after leveling up more in the game, he would destroy him. Daeyeon realized that this should be his best opportunity to finish him off right now. Before he could attack Haeyeon again, Gangu kicked his weapon away. He really wanted to resolve things by talking and not getting involved in fights like this. Meanwhile, Kim sighed now that he knew two new people were players. Things were about to get problematic or perhaps just more interesting. Meanwhile, she paused for a moment to observe Gang's player card. Noticing that with his still low level, it seemed he hadn't used many points yet. Still, for some reason, his stats were unusually high. Normally, for his strength to be that high, he would need 5 times what he had. It wasn't just his strength. All of his stats were out of the ordinary. They were increasing about 5 times more than anyone else's. In parallel, even Daeyeon was startled because the weapon he used flew away. Gangu's strength was truly superhuman, much greater than Haeyeon had ever been. This made him laugh. Gang responded that he was at higher levels than his friend, and he had also focused his points better. It was just because of that. Now Daeyeon began to understand he wanted to hear properly what this so-called real world was. He wanted to know if it was some kind of illicit activity that would make him stronger or anything like that. Or perhaps they had swapped their bodies to become stronger. Haeyeon replied that he didn't deserve to know anything and they wouldn't tell him. Gang said they should talk about it later. Now wasn't a good time. Daeyeon refused to stop fighting until he heard more about this game. He would make sure the media knew about the stupid things they had been doing. The way he knew how to do it, their lives would end up quite miserable. Gangu continued holding Haeyeon when he cursed Daeyeon for those threats. That's when Kim appeared, asking for permission to interrupt but wanting to talk to Gangu. She completely ignored Haeyeon and decided to take Gangu with her to the council room. But Daeyeon refused to let him leave like that without settling things. Kim couldn't care less about whatever Daeyeon was, and she told him to get out of her way. He was ready to threaten her and tell her he was the one in charge at the school. But there wasn't even time after he took a direct hit from the president. After knocking Daeyeon down with a punch, Kim decided she would take Gangu to talk. He had no choice but to follow her, scared of her strength. It wasn't a discussion. She was just going to make him accompany her no matter what. When they went to another room, Gangu commented that she didn't seem to be in a good mood. He almost got worried because he might have done something wrong to make her angry. Kim replied that it wasn't anything in particular. She just wanted to check something. She had just sent him something in the game and waited for him to accept. When Gangu saw it, it was an invitation to enter the training room, which surprised him. Even with the protagonist not knowing what it was, she asked him to accept without questioning. When he did, a bright light covered his eyes and the two ended up in another space. Kim explained that this was the training room, just as the name suggested. It was a place where one could enter when they wanted to check their stats or just train. He could also enter with a player who had been registered as his friend. Gangu asked why she had brought him there this time. But before that, she suggested that if he had some points left over, he should use them. Even so, the protagonist didn't understand why everything was so sudden. There wasn't any particular reason. Kim just wanted to fight him with everything she had. So she decided they would do this inside the training room to avoid destroying the school. This completely took him by surprise because suddenly she decided to fight out of nowhere. Gangu was worried because he really must have done something wrong to make her want to fight. Kim simply told him she would attack him in 5 seconds. If he hadn't used his save points yet, it was better to do so quickly. When she started the countdown, Gangu nervously opened his stats. Then she charged at him, landing several punches on the protagonist in succession. He was still a level 8 player, but Kim was at level 32. She was expecting him to take this really seriously. Otherwise, Gangu would really get hurt as a consequence of his leniency. The protagonist avoided the next blows, still not understanding why she was attacking. At least he wanted a reason, but Kim ignored him and kept hitting the protagonist. She was clearly trying to hurt him with her punches and attacks. If he didn't listen to what she said, he would end up really getting hurt after all. Gangu didn't understand anything anymore, but he couldn't die in the training area. So he decided to return her attacks, his kick sending her further away. Kim couldn't believe it wasn't a mistake now that she received his hit. She asked if he hadn't noticed anything strange now that they were fighting. Gangu didn't understand what exactly she was trying to infer with that. So she explains that they had a difference of almost 20 levels between them. Still, they were fighting almost on equal terms, or Gangu was almost surpassing her. She checked their statuses within the game app some time before the fight, and her statuses were always increasing 5 times more than common players. When she attacked him, it was because she wanted to verify if it was just a glitch on her profile screen, or perhaps some error within the game, but apparently it wasn't an error at all. Now, Kim was sure that Gangu had somehow cheated or his character profile was bugged. It was a bug that increased his stats 5 times more than others. This caught him completely by surprise. It shouldn't be normal for him to receive more than others. But even Kim couldn't say why. She had never encountered a player like him before. Now that Gangu stopped to think about it, he had only increased 1 point in strength, but suddenly he felt as if his attacks were much more powerful than that. When reflecting on this, the protagonist understood that it was because he had increased 5 times more. Gangu, however, was startled by the strange way Kim was laughing. She was anxious and quite excited to see that he was special in some way. She wanted him by her side and didn't want anyone else to know this information. The protagonist still thought that the chances of others noticing existed, but Kim told him to shut up and just not join any other player teams. Just be her friend and no one else is in the game. Gangu ended up agreeing, but even he didn't know how he could use this to his advantage. It wasn't as if he would use all that strength somewhere after everything. This made Kim laugh because he clearly didn't know anything until now. He had much more ease within dungeons and other missions because of this, especially since his level was still quite low and he was doing lighter missions. He could still do simple things like exercises or complete basic tasks. But as he gained levels, the missions and even the dungeons would become difficult. Sometimes they would get missions that were practically impossible alone. A few weeks ago, Kim received a mission to climb Mount Everest, and also a mission where he needed to race all the way to China. Gangu was somewhat shocked because they still needed to do those stupid missions. She could have just ignored them without any problem, and she reminded him of the penalties. If they received a game over, they wouldn't be able to earn rewards afterward, like becoming taller or more attractive. There were several useful rewards. Normally, they were things that couldn't be improved in real life. Moreover, Gangu was a player who was used to other games. His gamer pride could never let him abandon a game like that halfway. It was an impressive game that only people could dream of participating in. Even now, Kim was eager to be carried by him. Or rather, it could work together from then on and become stronger. Gangu saw on her face how ready she was to take advantage of his bug. In any case, she decided that they should go back and leave the training room. The discussion they had was quite important, and at least no one else would hear them.
Imagine waking up in a world where magic is real and adventure is around every corner. If you could be reborn into any manhwa universe today, which one would it be?
Back in the real world, Kim tells Gangu to get used to traveling like that. The light that appeared was temporary and wouldn't blind them as long as they didn't look directly at it. The protagonists soon became worried about the classes because they might have missed them, but Kim assures him that she was more aware of them, so there was no need to worry. This was because the time since they went to the training room hadn't changed at all. Even though he felt that more than 10 minutes had passed since they went there, Kim explains that whether inside dungeons or in the training room, time would always stop when they were teleported to some other location. Or perhaps it would be more appropriate to say that time slows down in this world. When the protagonist stopped to think about this, when he entered the novice dungeon, at that moment as soon as he returned, it still seemed to be the same time as when he left. It was quite convenient if they wanted to spend time alone or use this for exams. Gangu was surprised that Kim was using this to boost her grades, and she retorts that she was just using the special spaces wisely. Moreover, her grades were naturally good even without accessing the other world. This drew a laugh from Gangu, but Kim decided that they should return to class. They could meet after class and enter a dungeon together. Time passed, and the protagonist was still distracted by his own thoughts. Hayan turned to see his friend staring deeply at him for some reason. Something was different about him. Gangu wondered what his problem was. For some reason, he was furious with him, not to mention Daeong as well. Now the protagonist knew he was in trouble with those two so close. Even Jizin was looking at him with a smile for some reason. He thought she wanted nothing to do with a loser like him who had even hit her boyfriend. Gangu couldn't focus on the classes at all with the others staring at him like that. He just wanted the classes to end quickly so he could leave for good. But it was a shame because he couldn't leave even when the class ended. He wondered if he should transfer to another school and have a bit of peace in his life. Time passed and the classes ended. As soon as the teacher left, Daeong ran up to Gangu, just like Hayan, who wanted to talk to him, and the protagonist ran away. He just wanted to be alone, but those two were chasing him. It didn't take long for Gang to take refuge inside the student council room, preventing the other two from reaching him. They were so much startled by Kim. Inside the room, Kim saw that Gangu had arrived running and asked if he was so excited for the dungeon. Even with the protagonist lying, she asked if they could enter a medium dungeon. Gangu was worried because a medium dungeon was still too much for him, but she assured him that everything would be fine as long as they were working together. So the level of a dungeon wasn't really that important. They could just focus on having a little fun inside the dungeon. First, she sent an invitation to join her team, and the protagonist agreed. After accepting, a light soon teleported them directly to the dungeon. Gangu was surprised by the place. It was different from a beginner's dungeon. The beginner dungeon was more like a rocky mountain and was full of bears when you went. She remembered that the terrain of dungeons was always changing when you entered. It wouldn't always be a desert like the one they were in now. Normally, if someone wanted to clear a medium-level dungeon, they should at least reach level 25 and she would share her mission with him. Gangu had the ability to increase his stats 5 times more than normal, so Kim thought everything would turn out fine after all. Their current mission inside the medium dungeon was to hunt 30 slimes. It didn't take long for several slimes to start appearing around them. Gangu was all clumsy trying to sort things out, and Kim quickly moved away. The protagonist was hoping she could take care of at least half of them, but she just moved away, deciding she would only watch him fight. This was because she wanted to see how useful his stolen stats could be in dungeons like this. Gangu ended up getting caught up in the fight against the slimes, and it was chaos. They were attacking him like projectiles and barely gave him space to counter. For some reason, those slimes were all very fast and too powerful. Kim warned him not to keep his guard down like that. They were all quite powerful, even being slimes. It was a medium dungeon after all. They were even somewhat cute, but they still needed to be killed properly. In that, the protagonist decided to hit them, but his foot ended up sticking to the slime. His attacks weren't even working. Gangu wondered if it was because he was too weak. It seemed like nothing he did was having any effect or damage against them. Kim asked if he would like to receive some tips from a professional in the field, and she explained that common attacks wouldn't work unless real power was put into them. He could see the cores of the slimes when they weren't being aggressive. They needed to hit them before they finished forming. For that, he could use a spell or even hit them with a weapon. Gangu had no spells available and didn't even know where he would find a weapon. That's when he remembered that wooden stick he had received some time ago. He decided to grab this stick and hit the slimes with it, this time causing some damage. Now he was ready to take them all down using his attacks. Kim realized that even with Gangu being level 8, he could still handle slimes. Although she thought his stats were strange, it was like a level 40 player. It didn't take much longer for the protagonist to finish the mission. The 30 slimes were duly defeated, and they managed to complete it. Kim came down from where she was clapping for the protagonist who completed the mission. It didn't take long for the game to recognize his victory and offer various rewards. Gangu leveled up, but Kim was surprised because it was much more than just once. When she looked at his character sheet, the protagonist had managed to reach level 17. Obviously, he had leveled up almost 10 levels in total since he completed that mission. She had previously said that he normally wouldn't be able to handle a mission like that, let alone clear a dungeon like this. Now he could do it by her side. Kim said she could hunt 100 slimes and still wouldn't gain any levels. Even so, the protagonist would do the same and end up receiving a lot of experience. In that case, they could use each other to gain rewards. She suggested that she could allocate her new points to her stats. Gangu was surprised because she said he should do it immediately, but she agreed that he should do it now. He would gain the effects right away, and it wasn't even known exactly what could happen at the moment he did that. He wondered how he should reallocate his stats in that case. The protagonist decided that he would increase his stats since it seemed fun, just like it was an online game, and Gangu finished a little after that. Out of nowhere, Kim decided to kick the protagonist in the face. He was caught completely off guard by how sudden it was and barely managed to react. When Gang realized his attack seemed even slower than before, his kicks became weaker and slower. He had plenty of time to avoid them. Kim continued to charge at the protagonist, delivering several attacks in succession. The two kept exchanging blows for a while, and Gangu always remained on the defensive. The truth was that she was quite impressed. He had only allocated a few points, and even so, it was enough for his attacks to be well nullified this time. Gangu complained because she decided to attack again without any warning beforehand. That really hurt, even though it didn't cause much damage to his body. She simply replied that the protagonist should be able to handle a little pain. A common level 17 would have died after being attacked like that. Anyway, Gangu asked what would happen if he ever died in the dungeon. She replied that the dungeon might seem like a different world, but it was still reality. If he died during a mission in the dungeon, he would die in real life too. Now that they had finished, she suggested they should collect the rewards and go back. The reward was a necklace that granted 2 additional points of intelligence. She complained because that was all the reward after all the hard work. Gangu asked if she wanted the necklace and Kim declined. It was complete junk to her, but he could keep it if he wanted, and so he decided to keep the necklace. Then he asked why Kim was dedicating so much of her time to him. Kim replied that it was just because he was a very overpowered player. His stats were 5 times higher than normal and could be quite useful to her. She would have the chance to clear dungeons she normally couldn't do with his help. Moreover, Kim would be able to level up with relative ease. Certainly, Gangu would notice it too as time went on, because this was a game that would always get harder as it evolved. Thus, she decided they would go back, and the two left the dungeon. Back in the real world, Gangu sighed because he never got used to these trips, and time in the real world hadn't even passed a second as expected. He gained several levels and a new item in a short period of time. While he was quite satisfied, Kim said goodbye because it was enough for the day. She had something else to do and decided she would leave, waving. Yang realized he should go home too now that the time was favorable. In that case, she suggested they could walk back together. However, when they left the classroom, they found Daeong and Hyen. She asked what those two fools wanted standing out there. The two wanted to meet with Gangu, but he prepared to run away, only to be caught by the two who were outside at that moment. They still wanted answers to things they had decided to find out. However, Hyen soon noticed that something was off about Gangu. He wasn't giving off that aura he had a little while ago. Something strange had happened. That was his opportunity, and the protagonist decided to run away immediately. It didn't take long for the protagonist to get home and meet his mother. She quickly asked if he was hungry, and Gangu replied that he was fine. In fact, he was kind of tired, so he would go straight to his room to rest. A lot of things happened that day, so he wanted some time to himself. Even so, his mother asked if something happened at school that day. When he seemed confused, his mother decided to set that aside and let him rest. Gang decided to clarify that nothing happened, so there was no need to worry. What happened before was just an accident, and he could swear he didn't have to think too much about it. He promises that things would eventually return to normal and no other incident would occur. His mother starts to cry because this really made her quite relieved. She had been walking around quite worried because she had been changing recently. Gangu assured her that she didn't have to worry too much, but still, it left her like that. Back in the room, the protagonist soon received some notifications on his phone. As expected, they were notifications coming from Real World Mobile again. Rika appeared greeting the protagonist after such a bright day. He probably missed her since he didn't receive any missions this time. Gang responds that it wasn't that much if he had interacted with him that day. He would probably end up getting lost along the way as a consequence. However, Rika was startled to see that he gained so many levels in one day, and she asks what he had been doing during the time he was away. Gangu was somewhat surprised because the assistant was actively talking to him, even though he thought she was trying to avoid communicating during that time. Anyway, Rika forced a smile and paused to give him a new mission. Then they could talk about it before anything else or any other topic. The mission of the day was to form a team with a friend and clear a dungeon. He would be rewarded with a box of random items and rewards for completing it. However, Rika soon saw that he had already done this with another player named Kim, which made her sigh. She really wasn't in the mood for that and decided to just skip it. If he failed, he would immediately receive a random box of hair loss. Gangu was somewhat shocked because she simply gave something like that. Apparently, a random amount of hair would be lost, but it was a bit much. Anyway, Rika decided to pass the mission anyway and wished him good luck. He would have 6 hours to complete the mission, and Gangu sighed. Basically, he would have no choice but to do the same mission twice in a row. Being threatened to the point of losing hair was a drag. Suddenly, he received a call from some number on his phone. There was a contact that wasn't in his list, but the number seemed quite familiar. When he answered the call, he noticed that a woman was responding on the other end. She asked if he didn't recognize her voice, and Gangu wondered who was speaking. That's when the woman commented that she was somewhat disappointed for not being recognized. Then he realized it was Jizin, and he was startled as soon as he realized this. She laughed because the loser otaku finally recognized her voice after so long. She had something she wanted to talk to him about regarding the confession she made. However, Gangu simply hung up on her, which surprised her. Jizin shouted angrily because the jerk decided to ignore her outright, but the protagonist was too embarrassed to speak, not understanding why she had called suddenly in the middle of the night. He ended up panicking and even turned off his phone right away. Suddenly, the call came back, and Gangu saw that Jizin was trying to call again. It wasn't like he could answer normally, and even Jisian was surprised. After all, he wasn't trying to take her call after all. Jizin was getting irritated. That bastard decided to ignore her even after confessing. Anyway, finding out where he was living would be quite easy to do. Later, Gangu called Kim to meet up so late in the park. Then she got all conceited because he might have fallen for her, and he immediately refused because it was nothing like that. It was something important. He had a mission to form a team and enter a dungeon. There was little time left for it to end, and the penalty for failing was hair loss. When she heard that, Kim started crying from laughing so much at how stupid it was. Gang shouted angrily because it was a super serious matter and he needed her help. Even while laughing, she decided to agree and suggested they could go to a difficult dungeon this time. Normally, it was for players who were at level 30, but it would be easy for Gangu. Right away, he decided to accept her invitation, and she soon opened the dungeon. The two soon appeared inside the dungeon, and Gangu was impressed by how big it was. It seemed like this was how a difficult rank intermediate dungeon looked. Gangu was surprised because even Kim had never been to a dungeon like this before. It was her first time too. She always had the option to enter. But since she was weaker and below level 30, it was too much for her at the moment. She was feeling a bit nervous now that she was there. Suddenly, they both heard a loud noise that even sounded like an earthquake. The intermediate dungeon had the mission for them to defeat the army of orcs. A giant number of orcs rushed out from inside the temple. Gangu was startled when he saw the number of monsters running towards them. He asked her if she knew how powerful they could be, but even Kim didn't know, reminding him that they should be very careful. After all, if they died in the dungeon, death in real life was also certain. The dungeon they were in now was the second intermediate one. In this case, for players of level 30 or even higher than that. She was planning to enter one of these only at level 40 or higher, which meant she had never been in any of these before in her life. Gangu was worried, questioning why she had entered there anyway. She just laughed because she obviously brought him there because she trusted him. Gangu was the great thief and a player she should use to her advantage. Still, he was scared of the idea of facing so many orcs on his own. It didn't take long for Gangu to get hit by an orc and fly away like paper. Kim, on the other hand, grabbed her weapons and decided to charge at them right away. Maybe it was a mistake to have come here. She was starting to admit that now. Still, she kept fighting and taking down the orcs one after another, until one of them appeared from behind and forced her to back away quickly. Gangu ran over to check if she was okay after everything. She replied that there was no need to worry. She wouldn't die from something like that. Trying to face them on her own would end up being impossible after all. Kim asked about the protagonist and if he thought he could defeat them. The orcs were scary and big, but he replied that he thought he could. Gangu charged at an orc right away and she just watched him fight. She could tell from the previous attack that Gangu was indeed powerful. He had no difficulties. Those guys were nothing to him now that he was really fighting the weapon. Kim watched the scene. He was only at level 17 now. He didn't even have unlocked skills or anything flashy, but he was really taking down the orcs easily with his raw stats. Gangu continued fighting the monsters for a long time afterward. When it was over, Kim sighed, thinking that she had been a bit worried about him before. After all, he was still below level 20, but he really took care of all of them. In the end, Kim was impressed because it was truly amazing. It didn't take long for the game to recognize that they had completed the mission. Quickly, the two managed to level up several times in a row. Even Kim leveled up to 33 and was happy because she gained experience. She had been really worried because she hadn't leveled up recently. Especially after reaching level 30, she couldn't believe she had gotten to that point. Gangu mentioned that he also became much more powerful after everything. Kim agreed that it was because he came from the other intermediate dungeon. It was what she was expecting. They just needed to keep going like this and face even more dungeons than this. As long as they could be together for even longer than this, she could be able to reach the maximum level. Kim was really happy about that. She even wanted to kiss Gangu because he was her golden goose after all. Obviously, she was just teasing him even though she was genuinely happy. It seemed they wouldn't receive rewards this time. Maybe he should just go back. Gangu laughed back, probably because it was a game, but he was disappointed for not having rewards. Back at the park, Gangu saw that he had managed to level up to 25 now. Now that he was much more powerful than before, he wasn't getting much experience from the missions. Anyway, Kim praised him because they accomplished a lot that day. They could team up and clear other dungeons in the future. But in the meantime, she should go back to studying and focus on school. Sighing, the protagonist realized he should take the opportunity to go back home. However, he saw that his phone was receiving a notification that surprised him. It was Jizyan, who sent a message saying she was going to his house, and it was better that they actually went to meet after everything. Gangu was shocked and wondered if Daeong had put his girlfriend in the middle of all this. He was finding a way to bother her because he knew he had hit on Jizyan. Gangu didn't know how things were just getting worse after everything. Jizyan, meanwhile, was irritated, waiting for where that idiot was. He didn't even respond to her messages or calls, clearly ignoring her. She could swear she would end him when she found him. Gangu, on the other hand, caught a glimpse of her and realized she was furious. Above all, he wanted to know how she found out his address. For a moment, he decided he could wait for her to leave and things would resolve themselves. But Jizyan was irritated enough to wait there for as long as necessary. However, what Gangu really didn't expect was that his sister was coming home. Obviously, Jizyan took advantage of this to approach and talk to her. After hearing that she was related to Gangu, Jizyan mentioned she was a classmate. Jizyan noted that it shouldn't be anything too concerning, but Gangu wasn't responding. She kind of felt like she was being ignored, and that left her sister somewhat shocked, especially since she had been theorizing that Gangu had gotten a girlfriend. And now she was really impressed because her brother was seeing someone so beautiful. Not only that, but he was able to ignore this girl. While Jizyan was worrying about this, her sister quickly invited her in. The sister assured her that her brother would be home any minute. But before she could let Jizyan in, Gangu appeared running. He quickly grabbed Jizyan by the arm and hurriedly dragged her away. Even Jizyan was shocked because Gangu was able to run so suddenly. She thought she was going to faint after running so much, but then stopped for a moment, questioning why he was ignoring her calls and messages so much. It seemed like Gangu had always been hiding from her somewhere all this time. The protagonist questioned why she was showing up at his house now. She replied that it was just because he was always ignoring her. Gangu responded that he had no reason to reply if she was just going to bother him. Jizyan asked when she said she would disturb him so much, and he replied that it was because he ended up getting into a fight with Daeong. That's why he thought Jizyan kind of hated him since she was his girlfriend. This made her respond that they had actually broken up a while ago. Gangu was somewhat shocked at how quick that was, but Jizyan was fine with it. She wasn't interested in losers and heard that Gangu liked her. He still kind of was a loser, but he didn't seem that bad now. And he was still good at fighting. She thought they could make it work. That's why Jizyan decided she would give Gangu a chance. This caught him completely off guard, but Jisn was serious, and she didn't want to have to repeat her words twice, getting even closer to him, practically shouting that she would really give him a chance. In that case, Gangu should have been more excited and at least happy. She was an elite person and still wanted to show herself to a loser like him. Even so, Gangu was too distracted with himself to know what she wanted, and he just ran away from her, ignoring Jisn, who was protesting. His life at school was just getting even harder than usual. Jisn kept complaining, realizing that was why they called him a loser. Meanwhile, other delinquents watched this scene somewhat shocked. They thought maybe they should tell Daeong about it once and for all. Returning home, the protagonist was greeted the next day by his mother. She was surprised because Gangu woke up so quickly. She made his breakfast. Then his sister approached, asking if he had made up with his girlfriend. The other sister commented that she heard about it too. She couldn't believe it. After all, his girlfriend suddenly showed up and even came to visit their house like this. Gang stammered that it wasn't any of that, but they wanted to hear more about it, even saying it was true because he intended to wash up. The sisters knew that Jisn was a really beautiful girl and was dating her. They were all excited because Jisn found him even with Gangu protesting. She wasn't even his girlfriend, and they were deducing things this way. After running to his room, the protagonist wondered why all this was happening. He still couldn't believe that the girl who confessed to him for the first time in his life. And now Jisn decided to confess back and go after him, especially this girl in particular. Even so, it was probably just the delinquent trying to provoke him again. Gang felt really good about it and couldn't help but feel happy. That's when he received a notification, and he knew it must be from real world again. In fact, it was a notification alerting him that his manager was waiting for a meeting. Rika soon talked to Gangu and greeted him now that they saw each other again. The protagonist replies that unfortunately, he really didn't want to see her again, but she ignored him, saying they could start the day having fun with a new mission. While the protagonist was distracted on his phone, his sisters listened from outside. They thought Gangu was talking to his girlfriend and could hear her voice. Even with him denying it, they wanted to believe it was true after everything. The sisters laughed because Gangu was being shy to that extent. It was almost cute. Suddenly, when the protagonist opened his bedroom door, he saw the two stepping aside. He asked what those two were doing standing there in front, and they laughed, stammering that it was nothing, but they were obviously eavesdropping. Gangu left the room complaining because they were so interested in his life. He had a mission, or rather he had plans now, and decided to go out for a while. After notifying his mother, who was worried because he hadn't even eaten breakfast, the protagonist assured her he would grab something to eat on the way. However, before he could leave, Gangu bumped into someone who appeared suddenly. Asking where he was trying to rush off to, the person who spoke was his father, and the whole family was surprised. His father being home was indeed a miracle and a true rarity. It had been a long time since they had seen their father, and he replied that he missed them. Since their father was home, the sister suggested they could all eat together. Gangu got nervous because he had a ridiculous mission with a short time to complete it. He had to eat 3 heavy hamburgers within 30 minutes. Because of this, the protagonist declined the offer and ran out of the house, apologizing. But he assured them it was good to see his father after such a long time. His sister quickly got annoyed because that brat simply ignored their father. They hadn't even seen each other after so long, and he still put his girlfriend first. The father assured them it was fine because he knew Gangu must be busy. The sisters talked about his girlfriend, and the father was surprised to hear that. They mentioned she was quite a pretty girl, but then he was taken aback because the mother questioned whether her husband intended to show up at home without saying anything. She even suggested he might as well just marry his job at once. He soon noticed that his lovely wife was indeed in a bad mood, and he apologized because he had really been busy all this time. He approached to please his wife, telling her that the company announced a new game, and that it would end up becoming a project even bigger than they initially expected. But it would be ready soon, and he could come home more often. He hoped at least that his wife could forgive him this time for that. After sighing, she agreed as long as they could all eat together. The mother saw that Gangu had left to eat with his girlfriend, and the sisters agreed, having heard he was talking to her on the phone earlier. Still, they found the conversation strange when they listened closely. It wasn't about setting up a date or anything like that, actually. They were talking about completing a mission with rewards and penalties, and something about a real world. Maybe it was some kind of game. This soon caught their father's attention, but he said nothing despite being caught off guard. The sisters commented that they thought his girlfriend should like games too. Usually, people found others with very similar interests. Meanwhile, the protagonist was quite busy eating those hamburgers. It was such a ridiculous mission, and yet he had to do it. He could barely eat a snack. The truth was that Gangu would have preferred to eat his mother's cooking. Then he saw that his phone started ringing. It was Hyeon calling. This took him by surprise, making him ask why he was calling so suddenly. Despite that, he answered the call and decided to go out to meet his friend. The atmosphere between them had been quite strange since he found out of the real world. Hyeon said they could meet without any problems since they were friends. Gangu just laughed in response. It shouldn't be anything that serious to begin with. His friend just wanted to ask one thing. It was about his mission in the real world. But before anything, Gangu noticed that Hyeon seemed quite different from who he was before. He looked very different, and Gangu wanted to know if he was the same person he knew before. Hyeon got irritated with the protagonist for bothering him so much with questions. Gangu was unsure if he looked different because he wasn't wearing his school uniform. Hyeon just yelled at his idiot friend because he had lost 20 pounds. And yet he didn't notice something so obvious to begin with. There was a mission about losing weight and he wanted the reward. That was why. Now Gangu could understand that he had changed a bit, but in reality, he was quite different. Anyway, Hyeon called him there for a special reason. He had a quest to form a team with a friend and clear a dungeon. Since Gangu was the only player friend he had, he wanted his help to do this. The protagonist retorted that they were also friends in real life and still hadn't seen each other properly. This was something Hyun didn't want to hear him mention after everything. Hyun just wanted to know if Gangwoo would collaborate with him and join his team. And obviously Gangwoo agreed, even though the atmosphere between them was quite strange. This was actually a good opportunity. They could get closer again. Hyun got all excited and thanked him, promising to treat him to a snack. Gangwoo immediately felt nauseous just thinking about eating a hamburger. For now, Hyun decided to send an invitation to his friend to form a team. That was when he was startled to see that his friend was actually at level 25. He questioned why he had become so powerful in such a short time. Even Hyun did missions every day and had only reached level 15. Gangwoo just laughed a little, not exactly giving the answer he wanted to hear. But Hyun knew that his friend had started a bit earlier than him in the meantime. He should understand perhaps just a little more than he did, but it seemed like a bug. Leveling up should make it harder each time, not the opposite. He thought he would be able to catch up to Gangwoo in no time, but he ended up being caught off guard. Hyun had gained 7 levels in just one day. That was quite surprising. It seemed like he really loved playing, and that reflected a lot in his behavior. However, they could talk about that later. They should focus on the mission now. After forming a team, the two were teleported to meet in the dungeon. This was a beginner dungeon for level 1 that required only 5 levels. The field seemed to change every time they were inside the dungeon. Gangwoo asked what the mission would be this time, and it soon appeared for them. This time, they had to defeat about 20 goblins in the beginner dungeon. Hyun was fine with that. He had completed his main mission of forming the team, and he also managed to enter the dungeon with the protagonist thanks to him. So Hyun didn't intend to make Gangwoo work for him and kill the monsters. He would take care of everything alone this time, and the protagonist saw no problem with that. It didn't take long for the goblins to start appearing, and Hyun got ready. He even told the protagonist that he could leave the dungeon now, and Gangwoo agreed. But still, he stayed there to watch the fight happening in front of him. Hyun got excited when he ran out to face the monsters on his own. He had cleared other dungeons before without even breaking a sweat, and he was happy about that. However, something felt off, and he looked up. Then he saw several other goblins gathering in the trees for an ambush. As a result, he ended up being attacked multiple times in quick succession. Hyun was confused about what was happening. They were just goblins, but still they were too powerful, even after clearing the last dungeon. This one seemed like it should be easy, but suddenly he was being pressured. For some reason, the difficulty was increasing after he entered with a team. Not to mention that the one who hit him with all its strength was still standing. It seemed like his attacks weren't dealing enough damage, actually. Gangwoo just watched, but he saw that things were looking bad for his friend. For some reason, the goblins were persistent and didn't die from their repeated attacks. He wondered what would happen if he died in the game. Maybe it would be game over in real life. But more importantly, a game master like him was having problems. This was unbelievable for Hyun, who until then had dealt with things easily. After a moment, Gangwoo decided to intervene and helped his friend during the battle. He approached, apologizing to his friend because he knew Hyun didn't want to be helped. But it seemed like he was in real danger, and Gangwoo decided to help now. With a little more time passing, it didn't take long for them to finish the mission. Hyun was still trying to understand what the protagonist's problem was. After all, he was at a strength level far above normal, making him question how it was possible. He managed to take out all the goblins in just an instant, even when Hyun was having difficulties finishing off just one of them. The power difference between them was so great that it led to this. He wanted to understand how it was possible for their power difference to be so high. In any case, Hyun didn't want to believe that he hadn't made any improvement in his status. Gangwoo knew he would end up in trouble because his friend was being too suspicious, so he just changed the subject, saying they should leave now. And he simply said goodbye to Hyun even as he questioned the source of his great power. He wanted to know if it was the weapon he used or if he had discovered some other way to strengthen himself. Back in the real world, Hyun at least felt relieved because he had completed the mission. He managed to level up to level 8 at least, and he turned to Gangwoo. But he soon noticed that his friend took the opportunity to run away and avoid the conversation. The protagonist didn't know how to put this into words and didn't want to explain himself. Since joining the real world, Hyun's personality had changed quite a bit. Talking to him about things would only end up making everything even more problematic. If he learned that it was possible for Gangwoo to earn 5 more points than everyone else, he might end up feeling frustrated or just even more competitive than before. Even having helped him with the mission that day, he should be content with that. Back home, the protagonist announced his arrival after running. His mother quickly welcomed him, asking if he had eaten, and he agreed that he had. Gangwoo asked where his father was, and she said he had to go back to work. Staying, his sisters complained because he hadn't even tried to stay home and eat with them. She thought their father was sad because Gangwoo hadn't stayed for breakfast. He went to his room a little before leaving, and that surprised him. Even if that were the case, normally his father wasn't the type to do that. That's why his sister insisted on saying that he must be missing him. And yet he was so rude not to stay for breakfast with his family. His mother replied that it was just his father getting older. People who were aging tended to change a bit like that. Gangwoo was feeling a bit bad hearing this and decided he would text later. Having a girlfriend was a good thing and all, but his sister reminded him of family. The protagonist complained because he had already repeated several times that he didn't have one. Even so, for some reason, his family insisted that he was hiding someone. Dealing with relationships was quite tiring, and his sister was the most tiring of all. However, Gangu ended up being caught off guard when he went to his room. Because everything was turned upside down, it looked like his father had been searching for something there. But little did the protagonist know that a listening device had been placed under his desk. The next morning, the protagonist decided to follow his usual path to school. Sighing, Gang realized he would need to return to his regular routine. His school life had changed drastically since he joined the real world. He no longer had many friends, but now he was lonely on a different level than before. When he headed to school, people always avoided him as much as possible. Not to mention that there were others trying to flatter him so they wouldn't become his new targets. They promised they would follow Gangu like a powerful gang. All of this was really embarrassing, and he wanted these people to stop. Those guys were all making a fuss over something so small. Who showed up knocking down the followers was none other than Daeon. He said good morning, although he was clearly irritated by what had happened with Jizin. The protagonist quickly replied that he was wrong and that it wasn't like that at all. Even with him saying it was a misunderstanding, Daeong still insisted, because he heard that Gangu confessed to his girlfriend before all of this started. The protagonist tried to explain that it was for a mission within the real world. When he realized it, he ended up saying more than he should have again by reflex. But now Daeon understood that it really had everything to do with their so-called game. It was the only explanation for Gangu's ridiculous sudden strength and high-ends. In any case, the protagonist assures that he didn't even intend to go out with Jizin. After all, she was Daeon's girlfriend, and he retorted that actually they had broken up. The other boys hearing this celebrated because Gangu was dating the girl. The protagonist assures that it was nothing like that. He didn't even know why Jizin said that. But none of this was true. Daeon couldn't care less. Stammering because he didn't even like her to begin with, although it didn't seem true. She had a pretty face, and he just thought he could go out with her to improve his reputation. Instead, Daeon wanted to know what the protagonist knew about the real world. Gangu could see that this guy was too in love with that girl. It almost made him want to tell the truth about the game he was getting involved in. In fact, he didn't want anyone getting involved with that game more than now. Not to mention that if someone like Daeon gained so much power, it would be a problem. Daeon could end up using his strength to destroy the entire school as a result, in case he ended up getting hurt or committing a crime because of it. Then Gangu would end up feeling guilty because he was the one who put him in the middle of this. Daeon kept questioning to find out what this so-called real-world game was. Gangu knew that if he ended up hitting him, he would end up seriously injured. His level was too high to compete, and his stats 5 times greater than anyone else's. While wondering what to do, the others were still watching him. He couldn't care less. In fact, he almost wanted help from someone. The truth was that Daeon was ready to beat the truth out of him. Suddenly, someone hit him from behind, causing Daeon to turn around, threatening the person. The one who came to Gangu's aid was Kim, who immediately made him freeze in shock. Kim quickly took Gangu away, warning him to leave him alone or she wouldn't forgive him. He thanked her for the help, leaving Daeon behind after everything. Back at school, the protagonist sighed, exhausted from everything that had happened. Kim laughed at his reaction. He clearly had become more powerful, but still refused to fight. He could have taught Daeon the lesson whenever he wanted. And Gangu replied that was just how he was. He was afraid of accidentally killing him. This made her laugh a little. It was true that he was the type who always seemed a bit cheated. Then he remembered there was something he wanted to ask the protagonist. Why had Kim hit him hard on the head a little earlier and he still seemed fine? He knew how powerful Kim was, and yet she had hit another person with force. Normally that person should have died on the spot, but that wasn't the case. Kim asked if he really didn't know about status suppression. It seemed that Gangu was the type of guy who usually skipped tutorials after all. This made the protagonist laugh. He tended to be the kind of guy who had more fun playing, even though in this case he wasn't really playing for fun. In that, Kim showed him that he could use the bar to see his power level. It was a good way to enjoy his own life without causing problems. Gangu saw where she was pointing, explaining that he needed the details to suppress his powers. He didn't even know that a function like that existed. If he had known something like that existed, he would have done things very differently from the start. It would probably end up being complicated for him to mess with those settings, especially since he was always improving 5 times faster than the others. So far, Kim didn't know how he had continued living without that option activated. Gangu replied that he intentionally avoided putting points into his stats. That way, he could be more careful and avoid any problems in real life. It seemed like he had been having a tough time in review. Anyway, Kim recommended that he check the game details when he had the chance. Gangu agreed that he would do that. Now he could live without worrying too much. Suddenly, before he could leave, Kim asked him to wait a bit. Since they were there, she wanted to know if they could go into a dungeon together. Since she insisted so much, the protagonist ended up agreeing to help her. Now that he knew about the status limitation, Gangu knew he could adjust them before going to the dungeon. The two set off for a new dungeon, with Kim excited to reach the maximum level. This time, they ended up inside a cave. She had never seen one like that before, especially one so small. This time, they were in a high difficulty dungeon. They were supposed to defeat the Death Knight, who would be their new opponent. Now it seemed a little different from usual. Normally, they would have to kill several monsters, but it was just one this time. They both turned when something started to appear inside the dungeon. A rather scary knight emerged, and even Kim was surprised to see it. He quickly drew his sword and charged at them. Kim immediately knew it was dangerous. It was too much for the two of them to handle alone. They would end up dying as a consequence. Or so she thought, because Gangu took him down with just one move. Kim was frozen in shock after seeing what just happened. He kind of defeated a very powerful mob with just one attack. Gangu replied that he might seem a bit scary and was a little worried, but it was a relief that he fell with just one attack. The mission was completed, and soon Kim received a flurry of level ups. The protagonist did too, which made Kim all happy and excited to see how much stronger she had become. It had been a long time since she leveled up this much. She reached level 48. Meanwhile, Gangu reached level 30. Both of them were even stronger now. The game wasn't very fun at the beginning, but now the protagonist was enjoying it too. As a reward, they obtained some items like the Death Knight's armor, and also the sword made from the Death Knight's horn, two very good items. Kim noticed this and suggested that they could split them between themselves. She saw that the armor seemed perfect for her, hoping to keep it. Gangu ended up letting her have the armor since he liked it so much. In that case, he decided to keep the sword. Now he had a decent weapon to use. It was the Ifrit's horn, so the two decided to return to the real world with the mission's end. But before that could happen, Kim charged at Gangu and punched him. Her punch didn't even make the protagonist move, he stood perfectly still. As she expected, Kim Mount didn't even have a chance to fight against him. Even with a significant level difference, her attacks had no effect. But anyway, she decided that she should just keep trying even harder. Gangu was somewhat impressed because she had so much determination. Regardless, they finally decided to return to the real world now. Somewhere else, a man at a computer was typing when he was surprised. He called his coworkers to see something that had just happened. The others gathered to see what had shocked the man so much. He pointed out that someone managed to kill the Death Knight that day. Everyone was shocked to see this. After all, the Death Knight was not an easy boss. The game was marking that he was taken down by Kim, but they were all wondering how someone could have defeated him so quickly. And above all, it was a girl who was at level 48. They wondered who exactly this girl named Yeonhu Kim was. Suddenly, another person appeared, asking what everyone was talking. This person was Gangu's father, and his colleagues told him about the Death Knight's death. Even the protagonist's father was surprised because it was the most powerful monster of all. And it seemed that Kim hadn't taken him down alone. It was a group mission. Even with a team, they still shouldn't have been able to defeat this guy. The girl's name was Kim. They wanted to hear more about her and all her information. Gangu's father considered that she could be the one to fulfill his objective. Behind the still surprised team, a woman smiled to herself at the news. Since then, the protagonist felt more at home in the dungeons than in real life. He felt this way a lot lately given that so many people targeted him in real life. Jizin was furious because Gangu was ignoring her. Haya knew he was hiding something, and Daeong still wanted to know more about the game that made them powerful. His daily life was becoming really exhausting under so much pressure. What was unknown to Gangu was that this peaceful life he was enjoying would soon come to an end. He would get involved in an incredible event. Time continued to pass, and the protagonist spent his time with Kim. They went to another high-ranked dungeon, this time to defeat giant earthworms. The two worked together to kill them. Kim commented that there were several of them. Gangu knew they could handle them without much trouble despite that. Obviously, there was nothing to worry about regarding them. Even though they were powered up by their abilities, they were still weaker, especially when compared to the Death Knight they had faced. Gang fought with his own strength and always impressed Kim because he was getting stronger. Meanwhile, Gangu's father's team continued to see the results of Kim's efforts. Once again, she stood out by defeating monsters and clearing a new dungeon, even though they had increased the power and rank of the monsters, and had also significantly increased their numbers as well. It didn't seem like this was keeping Kim out of action. She kept triumphing. She cleared another dungeon alongside her team. It was an unstoppable pace. They were always surprised to see that she was now at level 49. Just one more dungeon, and she would reach the maximum level. It seemed she planned to go to another dungeon the next day as soon as it reset. The team decided they should continue sticking to the manual they had prepared in advance. Despite that, they were happy because it was the birth of a powerful player, a max-level person who could clear each of their dungeons. In parallel, Kim thanked Gangu again because they were able to clear other dungeons. Gang replied that he wouldn't have been able to enter those dungeons if it weren't for her. He himself managed to become even more powerful and quickly increased his level. Now that they thought about it, Kim noticed that Gangu had leveled up quite a bit too. He was still at level 30 after the last battle, but that was still good enough. When they had first met, he wasn't even at level 10. It was all thanks to Kim. She even said he should thank her properly. She put all of her strength into a few pats on his back, but Gangu didn't even react. Which made sense because he was gaining 5 times more stats than the others. He was probably close to level 130 in that regard. Then Gangu asked her when Kim learned about the game. She explained that she was invited by someone she knew to join. It was possible to invite up to 3 people in total to enter the real world mobile. Still, Gangu was curious to know why she was so dedicated to the game. For him, there were those ridiculous penalties and the problems caused in his school life, which was a bit too much for him to bear, but Kim did it for fun. Or at least that was how it seemed. She said she didn't intend to leave until she achieved first place. However, she was happy because Gangu asked more about her for the first time, and she even teased him because Gangu got all embarrassed about it, even asking if he had perhaps fallen in love with her or something like that. Gangu stepped back, shouting at her for suddenly talking about such nonsense. Instead, he ran home because it was getting late, leaving Kim behind, who sighed after seeing him run away. In any case, she would be waiting to meet him in the dungeon the next day. Gangu still didn't understand why his heart was beating so fast. He hadn't even thought about any of this before, but now she made him overly conscious. Back at his house, Rika soon found him greeting the protagonist. After all, he had completed all the day's missions and earned his rewards. He had also managed to reach level 30. His progress was impressive. Gangu thought he still had some advantages that others didn't have, so it was only natural that he ended up reaching this point. When he thought of Kim, he always blushed now, but he didn't even understand why. He couldn't hold back anymore. it was because she had put her face so close to his. This feeling that was growing inside him made him nervous, because they would meet again the next day to go to the dungeon. Considering how he felt now, Gangu wondered if he was really falling in love. The next day, to the complete shock of his classmates, Gangu arrived. But he had a new hairstyle that he saw in a fashion magazine. Even the delinquents were wondering what the heck that was. It was so ridiculous that it made him look like an even bigger loser than before. Even Hyan approached to ask what the heck he was wearing. Maybe he had failed a mission or something to end up like this. But Gang stammered that it was nothing like that. It wasn't a penalty or anything like that. He put a lot of effort into his appearance, so it was important. Hyan couldn't believe it was true. The hairstylist should be arrested. In parallel, Kim was waiting for Gangu because the final dungeon had been unlocked. During class, even Daeong was a bit shocked by the protagonist's new hairstyle. Meanwhile, Gang received new notifications on his phone. He wondered what it could be because he usually only received messages from the game. But when he looked, it was Jizn bothering him again, wanting to know about his appearance. And if it was because he was trying to impress her or anything like that. The protagonist just turned his face to the side with a sigh, ignoring her. At that moment, Gangu just wanted the class to end already. When he met Kim, she was jumping with happiness. After all, they could get very close to finishing the final dungeon of the game that day. Now she could finally surpass level 40 and maybe even reach the maximum. Gangu congratulated her in advance, and she quickly replied that it was all thanks to him. The protagonist got nervous again because she held his hand but didn't pull away. In any case, she decided they should hurry to clear the dungeon. Then they could go out to dinner together, an invitation that got Gangu really excited, which was obvious since she would be reaching level 50 after so long. The two were having a lot of fun with this prospect. Since Kim was with Gangu, she felt there shouldn't be any problems in the dungeon. The two decided to enter the dungeon and clicked to go. The protagonist wondered what kind of mission they were going on this time. She replied that regardless of what it was, it would probably be easy as always. After all, Gangu was there with her and she didn't need to worry too much. Gang responded that one could never know. Something horrible could still appear. Suddenly, the sky began to crack, interrupting their conversation. He wondered what that was as it started to thunder so suddenly. Kim said it was probably the game making the atmosphere much more serious than usual. She was curious to see what kind of madness would appear to celebrate her level 50. It started to rain, a reflection that something big was indeed approaching. A thunderclap struck in front of them, and it didn't take long for them to see exactly what appeared. It was a dragon called the Black Dragon that needed to be defeated to win the dungeon. Gang became worried because that kind of thing was a bit sudden. But the dragon didn't wait and unleashed a barrage of attacks against him right away. Even Kim was trembling when she saw the creature that appeared in front of them, and the protagonist had to call her attention so she wouldn't lose focus on the situation. He carried her away to avoid being in the dragon's attack area. Kim asked if Gangu would really be okay because the dragon looked tough. It was even spewing fire and could be really dangerous. Still, he didn't know the outcome of the battle, at least until he tried. Something still felt off, perhaps because of the last mission they had been on. That dragon was different from any other monster they had encountered so far. Gangu knew he needed to plan his new attacks just to be safe, but Kim asked him to put her down because he was still holding her, and he quickly did so, apologizing because he had no ulterior motives. He just didn't want her to get hurt because of the attacks. This made her laugh. He would have an easier fight without Kim in his arms anyway. But even during the cute moment, the dragon was still behind them, and Kim jumped when she saw it appearing behind Gangu. The protagonist used his sword against the dragon simply by reflex and pierced it. Kim charged at the monster to attack it more than once. She was worried about him because the dragon sent him flying away. It was a problem because now the dragon had decided to turn towards her next. Kim became concerned it was strong enough to even take down Gangu. Even though it was so powerful, Kim knew she still needed to give her all. She shouted into the air that she would certainly avenge Gangu now that he was gone. Shigen thought she heard his spirit speaking, but it was because Gangu hadn't died. He appeared again after taking that hit from the dragon, complaining that it had broken his glasses and ruined his clothes. Gangu did not intend to forgive it for such insolence, setting aside both the dragon and Kim, who fell silent at those words. The two charged at the opponent again and attacked the black dragon. Kim ended up taking a hit to her back and soon became vulnerable. The dragon prepared to unleash a fire blast in her direction as well. She remained on the ground trembling, so Gangu positioned himself in front of her. He urged her to get up because everything would end if she gave up now. They needed to rise and fight. He would do everything to protect her life. The dragon's attack was unleashed and Gangu parried it with his sword. To his surprise, his sword ended up taking the attack instead, which caught him off guard because it was indeed very impressive. Even Kim was left confused about what had just happened. The protagonist knew that if he hadn't been a stolen character from the start, then his sword wouldn't be anything special and they would have died right away. That would have been even harder, but Gangu seized his opportunity and attacked the dragon. The battle finally came to an end and the dragon fell with the protagonist sighing. All of this made his heart race and Kim approached to see if he was okay. It didn't take long for the game to recognize that they had managed to defeat the dragon. They had finally cleared the last dungeon of the game successfully. Kim was excited to see if she had finally reached the final level as expected, and Gangu congratulated her on her achievement and she thanked him, moving in to hug him. Watching from inside the dungeon, two men saw the two celebrating their victory. One of them wondered how skilled they would be if they were at level 50, and the other noted that they were indeed very capable if they could defeat the dragon. Sighing, they decided they should leave them as they were for now. When they approached, Gangu was startled because there were other people inside. None of them knew exactly who these two men were that had appeared. Kim knew they also didn't have the option to return to the real world yet, and she wondered if this was some kind of new event for reaching level 50. Despite that, she saw that the two men were actually quite handsome. Perhaps they were her reward for reaching level 50. One of the men asked who was the person that managed to reach the maximum level. Gang realized they were trying to talk, and Kim said they weren't monsters after all. The other man said it must be the girl who had reached level 50, because the target's name was Yanhui, and it was clearly a woman's name. The protagonist commented to Kim that they must be after her for reaching level 50, and one of the men spoke again, asking her to come closer to talk. Kim grumbled because those guys seemed kind of lazy looking like that. She approached anyway, asking what they wanted after all. One of the men said they wanted to talk to her about the dungeon they just cleared, but first she would need to accompany them. Kim still didn't understand anything, while the man said he was skilled enough to take down the Black Knight. Moreover, he had also defeated the dragon, and they wanted her to do something for them. Kim asked for a moment of calm because she suddenly didn't understand what they were talking about, but they assured her she would understand as soon as she accompanied them. She saw no reason to follow people she didn't even know, so they decided to say they were the true servants of the real world. Normally, this dungeon wouldn't be cleared even if it was at level 50, so they wanted to know how they were able to do that on their own. Kim replied that it was kind of embarrassing, but she didn't really want to go with them. However, they couldn't care less about her own will, and she was surprised because for some reason, the man who held her was quite strong. Even with Kim asking him to let her go because he was hurting her, he only intended to stop if she promised she would go with him now. Now they had no choice but to take the girl using their own strength. However, Gangu stepped in to make them stop forcing Kim. The man released Kim and easily dodged the punch coming from the protagonist. Gangu was surprised because his dexterity should actually be really high. Even the man was surprised because the protagonist's attacks were quite fast. Even though he wasn't at such a high level, he probably had something different. Gangu replied that it was none of that. He just had a special case. The man was surprised because his attacks were indeed powerful. He probably hadn't put all his points into dexterity like that. But more importantly, he wondered how he could be like this at his level. Gangu still charged at him furiously to make them disappear from Kim's sight. But the man replied that he was the one who should disappear because they only wanted her. The two continued fighting for a while, but the man saw that Gangu wasn't experienced. So he sent him flying away with his next attacks that came, and Kim worried about the state the protagonist would end up in next. She froze in shock. Gangu was 5 times stronger in stats than normal, and yet somehow he managed to lose with relative ease. After sending Gangu away, the man told Kim they should go now. They didn't intend to hurt her as long as she went with him in silence. She at least asked them to explain where they would be going, and he replied that it wouldn't take long. They just wanted to talk about something. It wasn't long before Gangu appeared again, this time flying at the man. This caught him by surprise and he took a solid hit. Kim felt relieved to see that the protagonist had returned and was still alive after that. She ran to see if Gangu was okay, and he agreed that he was, even though injured. To be honest, he was still feeling a huge amount of pain. The man who was hit was getting irritated as he was confronted. Suddenly, he shot a stone at the protagonist using some ability that hit Gangu squarely as the man intended to kill him in one go. He was knocked down at once, and the man let out a sigh when the fight ended. It had been a while since someone had angered him this much. The other man with him asked if he really needed to do that to the player, even though he would probably have to turn this guy into an ally later. The man rumbled that it was fine if they lost 1 or 2 along the way. There were still several other players who had died clearing the dungeons. Even if he had to fight for longer, he would probably have lost to Gangu. The protagonist sat down and saw how much he was bleeding after the blow. He had no strength left and couldn't even speak. Kim ran towards him to try to help, but the man stopped her. After all, she should have seen enough. Perhaps she wanted one more bloodbath. In that case, she should stop now and fully cooperate with him. Kim was crying desperately to go to Gangu, who was still bleeding, and the man stopped her because the boy would be lost after a while. It didn't take long for the man to get tired and simply knock her out at once. The man carried her out of the dungeon, and the other asked if they should return to headquarters. This guy was still worried about leaving Gangu to die like that in the dungeon, but even so, he decided to follow his colleague out of the dungeon. Meanwhile, in the game creator's office, a man said they had found. The person who reached level 50 for the first time had been captured. She was successfully caught by the captains of the first and second squads. That was good to hear. The protagonist's father was hoping there wouldn't be any problems. After all, the peace squad captains couldn't lose to a level 50. As they saw, the difference in skills was like night and day. They were on their way back with the player Yanhui Kim, and there was also a small problem that happened along the way. But it was nothing serious. Apparently, it was the player who was on Kim's team. He attacked the captain of the second squad and learned a lesson at their hands. In that case, they weren't too worried even if someone had such courage. The player's name was Gangu Choi, and that name surprised the protagonist's father. He immediately shouted, asking what the player's name was. And at that moment, he ordered them to show again what was happening inside the dungeon. Desperate, he grabbed to see the images of what happened in there. It didn't take long for him to see Gangu's unconscious body covered in blood on the ground. He wondered why his son was there in the middle of it all. Meanwhile, Gangu remembered that dying inside the dungeon meant the end in real life. It seemed that this would be the end of his life too, and there was nothing to be done. He wondered where they had taken Kim and hoped she was safe. He felt like he was reaching his limit the longer time passed. He cried, apologizing to his mother because he couldn't go back home anymore. Suddenly, a person appeared in front of the protagonist just in time. She wanted to check if Gangu was still alive. It was Rika herself. Rika mentioned that she had passed directly over his body at that moment. He would have ended up dead if she hadn't arrived in time to save him. In that case, she wondered how she should put this, then found an item in her pocket. It was a resurrection elixir that could revive a player who was dead. Asking her to hand over such a precious item to a player of such a low level made her wonder why, even though they didn't care about other players. Rika kept wondering why they would specifically revive Gangu. It seemed that the guy from the second squad was responsible for causing this big problem. They even stopped to worry about a rookie like that. Anyway, Rika placed the elixir on Gangu's wound to save him. He wondered what it was that she was pouring on his body now. Somehow, this stuff was making him feel better and the pain was disappearing. Rika watched him recover and said he could get up now that he had been revived. Gangu sighed in relief as the girl said she was a very busy person. But this idiot managed to fall asleep in the middle of it and Rika hit him to wake up. He sat up, asking why she kept stepping on him like that. It was then that Gang realized his injuries had been healed. Anyway, Rika waved goodbye because she had finished her tasks now. He asked her to wait. He at least wanted to talk a bit to understand what had happened. Rika ignored him and ran off, to which Gangu asked if she wasn't an NPC. He never imagined she was a real person or only existed inside the dungeons. He ran after her to get his answers and wanted to know where they had taken Kim. Rika grumbled irritably because that idiot was chasing her so much. When he called her an old hag and shouted, Rika turned around furious at once. She threw a punch in the protagonist's face as revenge for that. In the office, the assistant to his boss was worried about Rika causing problems, even if he had sent for the team member of Kim to be saved. In the end, she ended up sending him flying away after saving his life. Back to Rika, she sighed, realizing that she had hit him a bit too hard. It was surprising that she had lost her temper for just a moment. But Gangu crawled out from under the stones, complaining because he was in pain, but he was alive, and he questioned why she had hit him so suddenly. She didn't even answer his questions. He wanted to know about Kim and where she had gone. Rika was surprised by how durable Gangu was after a punch. It was just a momentary turn, but she still put all her strength into the punch. A level 32 shouldn't be able to withstand that kind of thing. Now regarding that, Gangu was still making different progress compared to others. There definitely had to be something different about him. Anyway, Rika decided to leave and get ice cream because it was more important, ignoring the protagonist who was still following her to talk. At least he wanted to know where those other guys had taken Kim. This only irritated her because Gangu was really starting to cry out of despair. If he was talking about the girl from before, then he would never see her again. Even if Gangu could reach the maximum level and contact them again, there was still a chance that Kim might not even be alive now. That only worried the protagonist even more, wanting to know what she was talking about. Gangu ran after her, but Rika disappeared before he could catch up. The system alerts that it has been 5 minutes since the dungeon was cleared. In this case, people would be sent back to the real world automatically. Gangu felt frustrated but couldn't go after anyone to find out about Kim. Back in the real world, the protagonist remembered his friend's list. At least he needed to check because there should be some useful function there. But when he opened the contacts list, Gangu saw that Kim had disappeared. As expected, she wasn't there and Gangu could only cry in despair. Back at school, he started walking alone, ignoring the gossip from others. Hyan appeared to ask if he had been in the student council all this time, and he asked where Kim had gone. But Gangu ignored him and walked past. That immediately made him realize that something was wrong with him. Back in class, the teacher called the roll, but Gangu didn't respond. He had been there that morning and Daeong said that now he hadn't returned yet, which was strange, but the teacher decided to note his absence anyway. Shizin was wondering what had happened because Gangu never missed class. Hyan still remembered the protagonist ignoring him a little while ago. Meanwhile, Gangu was alone on the rooftop when he called Rika and summoned her. The assistant responded normally and commented that he logged into the game as usual, but Gangu just asked her to tell him more about the things she had said before. He knew that Rika could hear his words, and that's why he wanted to hear more about it. She ignored him and decided to go over the daily mission, which was to run 10 laps around the school. Its reward would be an increase in his status points, but Gangu wanted to know why she was ignoring him so much if she knew where Kim was. Rika continued saying that if he failed the mission, a random status point would drop. The protagonist shouted at the assistant, calling her ugly, which clearly irritated her, and he insisted because she clearly paused after hearing his words. Rika said goodbye and ignored Gangu's attempts to talk. Defeated, the protagonist realized that no one really wanted to help him. Now he didn't know what to do. The guy who had taken Kim disappeared without a trace, and he wondered if he would ever end up meeting them again. That's when Gangu remembered that they were after a level 50 person. Therefore, he just needed to strive to reach the maximum level as well. They took Kim exactly because of that, so they should go after him too. It wasn't time for Gangu to feel discouraged because he had work to do. He would get stronger and see those guys once again after so long, so he wouldn't lose to those guys again. They said it was game over if he failed the missions multiple times. All Gangu had to do was clear dungeons and complete even more missions. That's why the protagonist decided that Kim just needed to wait for him a little longer. Time passed and Gangu continued doing his missions as usual, even doing the 10 laps around the school as required. A girl at school even saw the protagonist running like crazy, which was kind of shocking because it was raining and he wasn't even in class. It didn't take long for the girl to tell the teacher that Gangu was running around the school, and all of his classmates went to see it. An unbelievable scene. This made Daeong wonder if it was that game thing again. The teacher told his silly students to stop that and get back to studying. Moreover, someone should go after Gangu and tell him to return to class. Haya knew it had to be another real-world mission as always. The protagonist was still just focused on leveling up as much as possible. After he finished his mission, the protagonist saw that he still managed to. Now running for so long was nothing for him compared to the past. However, it wasn't really that problematic when he did it now. Gangu was merely gaining experience with those missions since then, which made sense since he was only doing low-rank missions. He thought the dungeons would just end up getting in his way. Rika soon appeared to congratulate the protagonist on completing his mission. She quickly handed him his status points as a reward. Gangu could bet she didn't want to talk to him even now, and she soon said goodbye. Gangu didn't expect to be able to count on Rika at this point. The only thing he could do was focus on reaching the maximum level of his power. Suddenly, Daeon appeared asking what he was doing wasting time outside of class, and if it was related again to that real world that was mentioned. Gangu said he wasn't in the mood to deal with people right now and wanted to be alone. Daeon questioned if he was feeling that important at this point, just having gotten stronger due to mere luck. The protagonist insisted he wanted to be alone, visibly irritated. Unlike before, Gangu was getting furious with Daeon's comments about being a loser. The protagonist charged at him, and all the other students were startled because the whole school shook and it even felt like an earthquake happened. Outside, Gangu had thrown a punch that caused massive destruction to the ground, clearly asserting to him that they were not the same kind of people. If he didn't leave, then Gangu alone was the one who would be leaving. Even after that, Daeon shouted for the protagonist to stop underestimating him, thinking he was better just because he gained some powers. If given the chance, he would get stronger and Gangu would stop thinking so highly of himself. He still wanted to know what the real world was if Gangu could defeat him when they were equal. Then Daeon promised he would recognize the protagonist, but the protagonist ignored him, and the students later saw the damage done in the courtyard. That was what clearly caused the earthquake, but they didn't know the source. After classes, the protagonist reflected that he could barely gain experience from the missions. He thought it was because he was playing normally, and that limited him. If he had just stuck to the missions, he would be around level 10 or so. The only reason he was at such a high level now was because of Kim. All the missions Gangu was taking now were low rank. There was no way to reach a high level if things continued like this. The dungeons he would receive now would give little experience. The ones that helped the most were those he cleared one per day and of high rank. He wanted to hurry and reach level 50 at once. That way he could see those guys again, but it would take longer than expected. Gangu was frustrated because he wanted to find another way to do this. Suddenly, the one who messaged the protagonist was his father. He usually never contacted him, so he wondered the reason for this. In this case, his father asked if they could go out to eat something for dinner. After completing the daily missions and his dungeon, there was nothing else to do. Gangu knew he needed to find ways to gain more experience. When he remembered his friend's list, he felt discouraged because Kin wasn't there. Now he only had Hyen on it. Those guys erased any trace of their existence. Hyen was also someone who had been difficult to deal with recently. Maybe he should eventually remove the guy from his friend's list. But when the protagonist paused for a moment, he realized something new. Now that he remembered this, if he teamed up with someone who was his friend, then he could enter the dungeon and do another mission. Gangu rushed out and realized he had found the answer he wanted. He could level up more quickly if he was with other people. He ended up running out of the house, ignoring his sister calling him for dinner. Gangu said he would skip dinner because he needed to meet a friend now. When he met Hayam, and he questioned what he wanted so suddenly. Even though he had ignored him all this time, he now simply called him to talk. The protagonist just said they should team up to clear a dungeon. This caught Hyen off guard, not understanding what he was talking about out of nowhere. Gangu knew his friend also wanted to get stronger quickly. They could team up to clear the dungeons. He would do his best to finish them. The dungeons he struggled with could be tackled with Gangu's help. Hyen pushed the protagonist away and not understanding where this idea came from. Why was he suddenly wanting to enter a dungeon with him? Gangu explained that they could only level up when they were inside them, and he promised he wasn't planning anything, just wanted to get stronger quickly. On the way, Hyen could benefit from this. It was a win for both of them. Something Hyen ended up agreeing to, but Gangu's excited look was frightening. He insisted they could join forces and work together. His goal was to reach the maximum level, so they should hurry. Suddenly, Hyen punched the protagonist squarely in the face to wake him up. This caught Gangu by surprise as his friend was questioning his problem, suddenly acting as if he was very focused on wanting to get strong, even though he had never been the type of guy to have that mindset before. Leveling up was a good thing, but he should at least learn to separate game from real life. Hyen didn't understand what happened, but his behavior was out of the ordinary. At that moment, the protagonist started to cry, which scared his friend even more. Right away, he tried to calm Gangu and asked what happened. He seemed to have lost his mind trying to gain more levels at this point. Meanwhile, the protagonist's father returned home and found his daughters. They didn't expect to see him again so soon. He replied that he just missed them, hugging his daughters right away. The mother also smiled, happy that he had come this time. She prepared all their favorite dishes for him to eat. The father, however, asked where Gangu was, curious about his whereabouts. The girl said he apparently had other plans now. He was going out to dinner with a friend that night and wouldn't be coming home. In any case, the daughters said they could eat together and enjoy their time. But the father refused, saying they should eat with Gangu and ask him to come home. The daughters were confused about why their father was so serious about this. And meanwhile, Gangu told his friend about what happened with Kim. As soon as she reached level 50, two weirdos took her away. They were powerful, and even the protagonist had no chance this time. Hyen now understood why he was trying to reach the maximum level. He wanted to do it quickly, so he would see those guys again. It was the only way for Gangu to possibly meet Kim again. Hyen reminded him that they should be ridiculously powerful, and even if they were part of the development team, they couldn't defeat them. Even at level 50, it wasn't enough for them to take them down, which was true, but Gangu just wanted the chance to see them again. He could remember that the guy he fought was caught off guard last time. It must have been the first time he saw someone with stronger stats than his. The protagonist then revealed to his friend that he had a stolen character, and at that moment he received a call from his father, which surprised him. Hyen said he should answer his father's call, he could respond and they would go to the dungeon. But Gangu knew they must be calling about dinner. He kind of left his family hanging this time and left before that. Normally, his father was never home and didn't bother to show up, but for some reason, he was acting all insistent that day. Gang hung up the call, which worried Hayam because he was acting this way. The protagonist saw no problem because he wasn't even close to his father to begin with. Time in the real world always paused when they went to the dungeon anyway, so you could only call back when they returned from there. Then the two went to the dungeon right away now that they were in agreement. Meanwhile, the protagonist's father was wondering why Gangu was ignoring him. The sisters were worried because their father was trembling, and they commented that Gangu had been acting strange since he started going out with someone. He didn't even pay attention to his own family. However, his father suddenly stood up. The sisters were startled, mentioning that they could eat without Gangu, until the mother appeared, asking her husband to stop ruining the mood. At that point, he was forced to agree and stay right there. Meanwhile, Gangu and Hayan went to the dungeon. His friend mentioned that so far, he'd always managed to handle the dungeons somehow on his own. And he wanted to know if Gangu was sure they wouldn't end up with problems, because Gangu was much stronger and the dungeon could get quite difficult that way. The protagonist assured him that he didn't need to worry. If Hayan had difficulties, he should just speak up because he could handle things. For now, the two had the mission to kill the werewolves. There were 30 of them. Gangu suggested they should split them 15 for each of them. Hayan reminded the protagonist that he hated being carried. He would like to enjoy the game's atmosphere at his own pace as well. Suddenly, the forest started making noise and the werewolves appeared. It was somewhat nerve-wracking since Hayan didn't know where the monsters would come from. They soon appeared in charge of the two of them, starting the battle. Hayan was startled by the size of the werewolf that appeared first. He thought the difficulty would really increase when they were in a team. It seemed like Gangu was just making things harder for him. The protagonist wasn't sure because he had only been going into dungeons with Kim until now, and she had always been much more powerful than him in general. But in the end, Gangu never found the dungeons challenging. He stepped back and let Hayan fight the werewolves with some difficulty. These guys were all really powerful. Hayan saw it with his own eyes. Things would get even more complicated than he had initially thought. He grabbed his weapon and prepared to start the real battle. Gangu just watched his friend fight as he drew his bow and arrow. Gradually, he managed to start killing the monsters and Gangu praised him for it, commenting on how his friend was really good in battles. Hayan asked why he was just watching without doing anything, and he replied that he was about to act, soon drawing his sword as well. The two began to fight together against the monsters, each killing several. It didn't take long for them to manage to kill all 30 werewolves. Then Gangu said they should head back soon, even with Hayan asking to wait a bit. He wanted to talk a little while they were still inside the dungeon, cursing him as he saw Gangu disappear from the dungeon. Back in the real world, the protagonist was really happy when he saw the results. He could gain more experience from the dungeons than from regular missions. Now he was really seeing results showing up on his experience bar. It was all good if he continued to clear more dungeons in a team. Gangu ignored Hayan until he started shouting. He questioned what was wrong with his friend. He knew Gangu was stronger, but still, he managed to kill the werewolves as if it were nothing. The protagonist let out a nervous laugh. To be honest, it would be too complicated to explain. Suddenly, Gangu received more calls and pushed Hayan away to answer. As expected, it was his father again trying to call him. Taking the opportunity to avoid the conversation with his friend, he answered the call. On the other end, his father asked if he had forgotten that they were all going to have dinner together. Gangu apologized because he had plans with a friend. They could eat together another time. But his father told him to shut up and come home immediately. It was so rude that it even left the protagonist a bit shocked. Normally, his father didn't act like that, but he was speaking very seriously. Gangu simply hung up, which only infuriated his father even more. His sisters also didn't understand what the problem was with their father. He had been strangely focused on Gangu recently, even though he didn't like him. The mother told her daughters to leave him alone. He probably wanted to make amends. After all, he had spent a long time away from home and finally wanted to be a father figure, even though his children had completely shut him out now. Hayan also found it a bit strange that Gangu ignored his father so much. But the protagonist thought it would be fine since he never cared about them anyway. And to be honest, things would end up getting weird between them if they met like this. Hayan concluded that his friend was a pretty bad son, and Gangu couldn't deny that. Anyway, he still wanted to know more about what he said before entering the dungeon. Something about being a glitch player or something like that. He wanted to hear more about it because that way he could obtain the same level of power. Gangu let out a nervous laugh, responding that maybe, but he talked too much about himself. Hayan retorted that if he didn't tell him about it, then they wouldn't form a team anymore. He himself couldn't care less about Kim anyway. Seeing how convinced his friend was, the protagonist ended up being forced to agree. But it was better that he didn't try to talk to anyone else about any of this. He didn't even know how he managed to gain that power. Gangu waited for Hayan to promise that he wouldn't speak ill of him after all this. Then with that done, he decided he would tell the truth to his friend, revealing that he was actually capable of gaining 5 times more status than anyone else. He hadn't realized it before, but this game made people superhuman. That's why Gangu had even compared himself to someone else. Until then, he thought he was on the same level as the other players in this world. This only left Hayan more confused because level 50 should be the maximum. So being at level 10 was like Gangu being at the maximum from the start. In terms of numbers, now Hayan knew he could never catch up to his friend, at least not in terms of status. Hayan couldn't believe it was true. There was probably some secret that Gangu was hiding to be so strong. He wouldn't say something like that just to become a ranked player. Gangu replied that he didn't know the reason. He always knew Hayan would react like this. That's why he didn't want to tell Hyun the truth, but he did because he wanted to help. If Gangwoo was going to defeat the guy who took Kim, he needed to get even stronger. And he also needed at least one ally who was equally powerful. Obviously, he wouldn't hide this from him now that they had reached this point. Seeing his reaction, Hyun could tell that Gangwoo wasn't lying. He would try to figure out how to gain status just like the protagonist did. Hyun was determined not to lose to Gangwoo in this game, but for now, they would form a team. It wasn't like he would lose anything teaming up with him to go into dungeons, but Hyun intended to say just once that he would become #1 in this game. Even with his disadvantage, his goal was to achieve victory. Gangwoo laughed, agreeing that he thought Hyun could do it if he were him. After all, Hyun had always been a much better player than the protagonist. In parallel to this conversation, Daeong was training to get stronger at the gym. The others watched a bit shocked at how hard he was pushing himself. They were impressed, even though he was just a student who had joined recently. Apparently, it was Daeong's first time doing kickboxing, but he really had a talent for fighting. Everything indicated that. He would catch up to the adults in no time. However, Daeong thought he still had a long way to go. He was still nothing compared to Gangwoo. He knew he couldn't stay like this forever. But if he did nothing, he would end up dying of frustration at this pace. Another guy told Daeong that someone was calling him and he should take a break. It was probably Changsik asking if they could go out for coffee. Even though he had said he would quit the games, Daeong answered the phone anyway. When he picked up, he asked who was on the other side until he saw it was Gangwoo. Gangwoo asked him if they could meet for a moment to talk. That caught him by surprise, asking why they needed to meet so suddenly. He was trying to sort things out so abruptly. Above all, he wanted to know if he would finally hear about the real world. To his true shock, the protagonist agreed to all his questions. He really intended to tell him what the real world was. That's why Daeong ran to meet the protagonist right away, even though he didn't understand what exactly motivated his change. If he was finally going to tell the truth, there was no reason to refuse. This time he intended to take down Gangwoo using everything he had. When he arrived at the park, he didn't find the protagonist as he was expecting. He hoped Gangwoo wasn't trolling him or anything like that. But Gangwoo showed up just as he had promised, approaching him. He knew Daeong would definitely come as soon as he spoke to him. Daeong demanded to hear more about what this game they were involved in was. The protagonist replied that there were too many people there. They should go somewhere else. This irritated him, and Daeong charged at Gangwoo to make him talk now, only for his kick to the back to not even leave a scratch. Again, the protagonist insisted that they talk in another location. Daeong ended up being forced to agree when he saw that his attacks weren't working. The people around saw this and wondered if they were fighting. They heard the noise and it was really attracting too much attention. Still, Daeong felt that the protagonist seemed quite different from before. He decided that he would follow as requested and would listen to what he had to say. It didn't take long for Daeong to question where they were going because they had walked too much. As soon as they reached a suitable point, the delinquent asked about the real world again, just for Gangwoo to tell him to calm down a bit because he wouldn't shut up. This only irritated him more and more because both Gangwoo and Hyun had gained a lot of power. Gang finally revealed that the real world was a game, showing his phone to him. It was simply an online game just as the name suggested from the beginning. This infuriated Daeong because it seemed like he was mocking him. The real world should be something illicit or make them stronger. This made the protagonist laugh because it was the most natural reaction to expect. Even Gangwoo didn't believe it at first, but he showed it on his phone for Daeong to see. He could see his level and all of his stats. It was really just a game. It was an incredible game when the rewards affected real life. The game periodically gave missions, and if completed, you would earn various rewards. But if you failed, you would end up receiving penalties. He gave the example of needing to run 20 laps within an hour, and you could gain 3 centimeters in height as a reward. As a penalty, you could gain 10 kilograms, but it always depended. All of this would end up affecting real life, which surprised Daeong quite a bit. It was absurd to imagine something like that happening, but after everything he had seen. At this point, Daeong couldn't suspect anything anymore. Gang showed him that he had gotten taller after several missions he had completed. The truth was that Daeong hadn't even noticed any of this to begin with. In any case, doing the missions could really increase your abilities, and you could also earn points in your stats to strengthen yourself. Obviously, these stats could also be applied in real life. Now Daeong understood how those two had gained so much power in such a short time. Gangwoo hoped he had answered all his questions now. But Daeong didn't understand the reason for him suddenly telling all this. After gaining this power, he made a move and hit on his ex. It still made him look like a complete idiot. It seemed like he had something personal against him. Gangwoo replied that it was a misunderstanding. It was a mission from the real world, and he had no choice. The delinquent ended up letting it go because it didn't matter anymore. That's when the protagonist revealed that he was telling this for a reason. It was because he wanted to invite Daeong to play with him in the real world. This caught him by surprise, and Gangwoo continued explaining how things work. As long as they didn't exceed 100 people, each player could invite up to 3 people. In this, the protagonist decided that he would invite Daeong, but he stopped when he saw. This was because they were already at 99 people playing. The delinquent became desperate because if they didn't hurry, they would lose the chance. But before that, Gangwoo wanted to make sure he promised him something. It wasn't anything related to not hitting him or anything like that. There was a dungeon that was available once a day to players, and Gangwoo wanted him to invite him to his team when he decided to participate in it. These were his terms for him to be able to call him as a player. Daeong didn't know what he was talking about, but he decided to agree anyway. As soon as they decided to do this, Gangwoo took Daeong's phone to show the QR code. A bright light that almost blinded the delinquent made him hesitate. It didn't take long for a girl to appear welcoming the new player. The girl was a guide assistant named Elisa who would help Daeong in the game. Daeong immediately found this a real embarrassment to see. He would never imagine what was going through that otaku's head to make him call him like that, especially with some generic cliché female character from anime on his screen. Elisa even questioned what he was talking about right in front of her. This caught him off guard enough for him to drop the phone on his own face. Who hasn't, right? After this silly scene with Daeon having been caught off guard. For a second, he almost thought she really heard his words. Elisa continued saying that since it was his first time playing real-world mobile, they took the opportunity to prepare a tutorial to help him adjust to the game. She would explain the rules in detail after he completed the tutorial. For now, he should do a mission that was to run 10 laps around the school in an hour. Daeon was surprised. He thought it should be a different tutorial, but it was a bit different for a first standard mission in a game. Elisa continues explaining that if he manages to do this, he would be rewarded $7. But if he fails, that same amount would be deducted from his account immediately. So she leaves, wishing him good luck to make it work. After leaving him still stunned by what he witnessed, Daeon sighed. It was exactly as Gangwoo explained since then, nothing too different. If what he had told him was completely true, then he would earn rewards, or penalties depending on the type of mission he was going to undertake. But still, $7 wasn't much for running 10 laps around the whole school. He had just taken a shower, so Daeon decided to ignore the tutorial. Not to mention that he didn't even have that much money in his bank account. Thus, he wondered how he would manage to take that from him. Anyway, Daeon decided to wait and see what would happen in an hour. He might be able to see if Gangwoo was telling the truth or not after all. Meanwhile, the protagonist couldn't believe there were already 100 players in the real world. That was the kind of thing that went against what had originally been planned. Previously, the protagonist hoped to invite about 3 people, and they could still invite 3 more, but it didn't seem like that would be the case. Moreover, he wanted to make even more friends to go to 10 dungeons every day. This made him wonder how he should reach level 50 at this pace to save Kim. It didn't take long for the protagonist to run into his father on the way. He wanted to know why Gangwoo was ignoring his calls. All he wanted was to have dinner together, but he was still ignoring him. This made the protagonist laugh, responding that he just had things to do with his friends. Gang realized he would be going back to work anyway. This made his father sigh, agreeing that normally this would be the case. He could understand why he had been acting this way until now. But still, he asked him to pretend to care when he was talking to him. Gangwoo apologized to his father and he forgave him. Now they could move on from this. In that, he comments that his phone had been ringing a lot these days, and he asks if he would have any problems showing him the reason for that. Gangwoo was confused as to why his father wanted to see his phone all of a sudden. He knew he was his father, but it was still an invasion of privacy, even with his father insisting that he wanted to ensure he was doing the right things. The protagonist didn't hand over the phone, not knowing how he could act this way. After all, he wasn't doing anything wrong, so he didn't need to worry. If he was worried about what happened at school before, everything would be fine this time. And his father reflected that none of this made sense when looking at it this way. A nerd like him facing delinquents was completely out of the question. Suddenly, his father kicked Gangwoo, who jumped away, and he questions what was wrong with his father to resort to violence like that out of nowhere. Gangwoo really didn't understand his father's actions after all. He usually never paid attention to his children and suddenly was acting this way. Insisting and wanting to take his things without permission, Gangwoo wouldn't show his phone. After a moment, his father says it's fine and he doesn't need to show it. Moreover, Gangwoo wanted to understand what this sudden change of attitude was about. His father could see the change in his son too, and that he was a player in the real world. This completely surprised the protagonist because his father knew about it. He asked his father if he was also a player after all. His father lets out a sigh because he couldn't explain everything in detail. He didn't even know how Gang got involved in this mess. But all he knew was that he wanted his son to get out of the game right now. It was too dangerous for him to be part of the game and keep getting involved. Gangwoo still didn't understand the reason for this, but his father continued explaining. He should be having fun now because of the rewards and powers received. But not everything inside the game would be fun and happiness. It wasn't like Gangwoo was playing for the rewards, and he told that to his father. He had his own reasons for not being able to stop playing now. His father immediately knew that his son wouldn't listen to his words. It seemed he had no choice but to force Gangwoo to leave the game. The protagonist realized that his father was becoming more and more aggressive in his behavior. Obviously, he wanted to start a fight and make Gangwoo back down. Just one more time, he asked his son to delete the real world. It was a request he was making to his son because he cared a lot about him. Gangwoo replied again that he had his reasons to continue and refused. Then his father asked what level he was at now in the game. Gangwoo responded that he was around level 30 and asked if his father was also a player. Maybe they could even work together in a dungeon. But his father lunged at him immediately, not caring about anything else. He wanted to grab his cell phone, but Gangwoo just dodged his advances. This surprised his father. He could understand why he had dodged the attacks before, because he wasn't fighting him very seriously after all. But now his father was giving it his all and still couldn't reach Gangwoo. Questioning how he could do this, he wondered if he had put his points into dexterity. The protagonist continued to avoid his father as much as possible and moved quite far away from him. Realizing that he didn't intend to give up, Gangwoo understood he had no choice. Thus, he sent a kick towards his father, who easily defended himself. This was a real shock, even though Gangwoo was 5 times stronger in his stats. His father was also a bit surprised because his power was above level 30. It seemed he really hadn't put all his points into dexterity after all. Gangwoo kept attacking his father during the battle. Suddenly, a voice appeared, interrupting the fight and asking what they were doing. The woman stepped in between them and stopped the battle immediately. It didn't seem good to her that parents and children were fighting in the middle of the street. His father was surprised, not knowing why that woman had appeared. Gangwoo didn't understand what was happening or who this person was. That's when he noticed that the woman was actually the owner of the game store from before. The woman greeted the protagonist because it had been a while since they last saw each other. It really seemed like Gangwoo had been enjoying the game recently. That's when his father realized that it was this woman who invited his son to the game, and she mentioned that they didn't need to be so worried about it now. After all, they were causing a huge commotion in the park, ending up attracting a crowd of curious people wanting to know what happened. Around them, people were even recording, asking who they were. They were people capable of destroying the ground and even thought it was some kind of performance. The protagonist's father asked the woman what she intended to do, and she replied that she just came to ask the same question. After all, he was there and not working. Those who were of high status probably wouldn't let this slide. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to leave and return to the company. Gangwoo asked him to wait a bit, wanting answers about what happened. His father and the store owner had known each other all this time and had been in contact. He also wanted to know what exactly the game was and what happened to Kim. But even with the protagonist going after his father, he couldn't catch up. The woman quickly found a way to take Gangwoo down and prevent him from following. Meanwhile, Daeong realized there were only a few minutes left until the mission ended. He wanted to see how things would unfold now that he had no money in his account. Suddenly, he received a message from Minsu Kim to chat, asking if Daeong had seen the video on SNS that was really ridiculous. Minsu sent the link for Daeong to watch the video they were referring to. When he opened it, he noticed it was the recording of the fight between Gangwoo and his father. This caught him by surprise because for some reason, Gangwoo was fighting in a crowded place. The video had been posted recently, so it must have been just now. While Daeong was wondering who exactly he was fighting, Minsu sent another message saying he forgot to pay him the last time, and decided to send the transfer now, which surprised Daeong. But the money hit his account just as the game canceled the tutorial. Elisa alerted him that unfortunately, he had failed the mission to complete the race. As mentioned before, they would reduce the money from his account, and that's what happened. The next day, when Gangwoo went to school, everyone knew about his fight with his father, and they were scared of him, calling him a monster after what they saw. It seemed to make sense for him to be hanging out with the other delinquents at school now. It was inhumane. His above-normal strength was frightening people. Gangwoo sighed. It was all his father's fault that caused that whole mess. He couldn't even sleep after what happened last night. What if that were the case, then he should be showing up on your friends list now. However, Gangwoo didn't see his father on the friends list, only Hyen and Daeong. Suddenly, voices appeared calling the protagonist the strongest guy of all. They were those idiots who kept praising him all the time and bothering him. The guys really believed he wanted to take over the world or something like that. Gangwoo had completely forgotten about that stupid fan club they created. He asked them not to post anything about him, but they still wanted to do it anyway. Suddenly, a voice told the losers to disappear and sent the guys flying. It was Daeong who appeared, commenting that he didn't know he had become this center of so much attention. To start with, his fighting clip had appeared on the internet and he was acting like the king of the school. Gangwoo laughed nervously because none of this was his fault. While Daeong was talking, the other goofballs pointed out that he was being quite rude to the leader. He could be a delinquent at school, but he still couldn't face Gangwoo. But Daeong sent those guys flying away with a punch right away, thanking the protagonist because he invited him to the real world the other day. Gangwoo hoped that at least he would keep his promise from before, about them going together to the dungeons and conquering them later. At that moment, Daeong smiled and kicked the protagonist, who defended himself effortlessly. Gangwoo asked what he was doing and if he didn't intend to keep his promise. He replied that he had completed some missions the other day and increased his stats. He just wanted to check how much he could do now that he was stronger than usual. He could still see that there was a difference between their levels after all. The protagonist didn't care about anything else as long as he kept his promise. In response, Daeong said he would keep his promise as required. He was a guy who always kept his word after all. With that, he asked him to come see him after class so they could go together. Daeong was preparing so that he could surpass Gangwoo someday. He just needed to get ready for that day that would come very soon. Unfortunately for Daeong, that day would likely never come considering his bug in the stats. Meanwhile, at Gangwoo's father's company, everyone saw that they had reached 100 players. Even so, it took much longer than usual for that to happen. A woman approached the man who was lost in his thoughts. He was quite lost in thought, and the woman laughed because he was acting that way, when he should have taken his time to listen to his subordinates speaking and reporting. It wasn't long before manager Kim appeared, being greeted by the subordinates. The manager was soon approached by Gangwoo's father to talk about what happened the day before. They hadn't had the chance to discuss things since then, but he hoped they could talk about it now in private. The manager agreed, and the two moved away to go to a private room. When she didn't seem to know what it was about, Gangwoo's father was surprised by her reaction. He didn't want to talk about the scene made the day before, but about his son, wanting to know why the manager had invited Gangwoo to the game. But she saw no problem with it because it was her job to recruit new players. The man was irritated because Gangwoo shouldn't be allowed to participate in the game. He wanted to remove his son from the game, and the manager questioned how he intended to do that. To start with, he intended to make Gangwoo encounter impossible missions until the end. The manager knew it was an option to consider, but sending missions to players was not her responsibility, and recruiting was her responsibility. If he continued to act like this outside of her work material, then she would be forced to report this to her superiors. This made him freeze, trembling with irritation because his family got involved in this. The manager retorted that his family wasn't the only family in the real world. Now that she thought about it, she wondered what Yeonwoo Kim was doing. Meanwhile, Kim was exhausted while making efforts against something. Without Gangwoo knowing anything about this, he told Hyen about Daeong. who got furious because his friend told the delinquent about the game. Gangu explained that they needed to increase the number of people in the dungeon team. The way to make this work was to allow them to go to more dungeons. Daeon asked if the loser was worried about being kicked back. The two soon started to fight, and the protagonist asked them to calm down. But Hayam retorted because they could be friends and would never get close to him. He had made his life a real hell at that school for a long time. And Daeon agreed because Hayam was his personal punching bag. Gangu positioned himself between them again to make them stop fighting. They should form a team first, then they would tackle Hayam's dungeon. Hayam refuses because clearing his dungeon would cause Daeon to level up several times as well. At this rate, he would quickly reach their level of power. However, that had been Gangu's plan from the beginning too. Then they could access even higher ranked dungeons with Daeon. They shouldn't forget that Hayam gained a lot of levels just by going with Gangu. If they were with Daeon, it could only get even better for them. Daeon laughed, assuring them that he didn't need to worry, even if they caught up in levels. He didn't intend to bother those two like he did before. After the protagonist asked him to stop teasing his friend, they formed a team. It didn't take long for the three to be sent to Hayam's dungeon. Daeon was startled because they were teleported into another location. It was an intermediate dungeon whose mission was to hunt 20 fallen angels. The delinquent was surprised because there were holograms and monsters too. Hayam got annoyed with that new idiot in games and told him to shut up. Gangu asked Daeon to stay back and hide somewhere. Obviously, this irritated him because it felt like treating him like a coward. But soon several fallen angels appeared in front of them and Gangu got excited. They were the amount of experience they needed. It was the best kind of reward, especially for the protagonist who was looking to reach the maximum level. In this case, Daeon decided he would fight because just a 20 level difference seemed small. Hayam replied that he could indeed do that, obviously being mean to him. Gangu kept asking him to hide in the meantime. To their shock, the angel attacked them with great fury and speed. Hayam was startled because these guys were very fast and they could barely react. It seemed they needed to be at least level 30 to face level 20 mobs in the dungeon. Daeon was equally shocked because he could barely see them moving. Gangu told him to hide behind the pillars because he would take care of the monsters. The delinquent was still shocked by what he saw inside the real world. It didn't take long for the protagonist to reveal that they actually died in real life too. That only irritated Daeon because the idiot brought him to such a dangerous place. As he took too long to hide, the angels started targeting him next. The other two quickly became worried because he attacked and created a large cloud of smoke. Gang shouted for Daeon, but his voice telling him to shut up appeared. He had dodged the attack, telling them to go kill those things quickly. Hayam was surprised because he managed to avoid the attack even being at such a low level. It seemed he must have dodged purely by instinct. Then Gangu charged at the angels to finally fight them. Even Hayam was having trouble during the battle, but Gangu took care of them. Daeon watched this in amazement. The power difference between them was enormous. He couldn't believe that Gangu had 5 times more stats, and it made such a difference. When the mission ended, Daeon was surprised because they gained so much experience. Hayam sighed his excited reaction because it was classic for a newbie. He was low level, so he would obviously gain many more levels than usual. The higher his levels got, the harder it would be to gain so much experience. Gangu, on the other hand, saw that he had gained more experience too. It seemed Daeon gained a ton of levels because he was weaker. He should soon be able to access intermediate dungeons on his own. Daeon warned Hayam to keep an eye on him as he leveled up and got stronger. And Hayam retorted that he should just try if that's what he thought. At this rate, however, Gangu knew he would soon reach level 50. Back in the real world, Daeon saw that no time had passed since they entered. They explained to him that time froze whenever they went out to the dungeons. In that, Daeon complained to Gangu because he didn't explain things before putting him in the middle. The dungeons were super dangerous and he could have almost died. The protagonist laughed, apologizing, although that didn't help much. Still, the delinquent gained a significant amount of levels now. With his dungeon opening up, they could face it and then Gangu's dungeon too. Daeon even teased that he felt bad for being carried by 2 smelly of Takis like them. Meanwhile, Kim was also doing her job and fighting at all costs against soldiers. She was doing this using her own hands and on her own. Drawing her sword, she charged at the warriors immediately. However, they were powerful and sent her flying far away. But they came after her, ready to attack as soon as she hit the ground. Suddenly, Cuts appeared that took out all the soldiers with her sword. Kim was startled, hearing a voice grumbling that it was disappointing to do this every time. The person asks if she was really the one who killed the dragon and the Death Knight. Those monsters were all much weaker than these two. The man questions Kim to find out what happened here. If she was really that weak, there was no point in bringing her with them. She could tell the truth, as it was clear she hadn't killed the final dragon. Kim laughed nervously because obviously she was level 50 and strong. She knew that if she told them the truth, they would probably go after Gangu next. And that was something she couldn't allow to happen. But it didn't take long for the man to ask if the guy who was with her on her team before. He probably should be the great ace who helped her on this journey. As Kim fell silent, he imagined he had hit the nail on the head with his words. Even having fought against him at that time, he could say how strong Gangu was. He ended up being caught off guard during a specific moment, but it was clear to him that it was Gangu who took down the most powerful bosses. Kim responds that this was impossible. That boy was only level 30. He of all people should know he was just a low-level player. Kim was happy that another player was in the real world and had just brought him along to help. After all, Gangu wasn't really powerful, but the man wondered if that was true. It seemed that Gangu was more powerful than she was seeing it that way. In any case, he hoped Kim would be prepared for the upcoming tests. Meanwhile, Daeon was still complaining to the protagonist. because once again the dungeon they went to was so dangerous that he almost died again. Gangu's dungeon was 1,000 times worse than any other they could have gone to, and the protagonist laughed at his anger, but at least everyone got stronger from it. Now Hyan reached level 24 and Daeong leveled up to 16. Obviously, the delinquent complained, but he never refused a challenge. Now that he thought about it, Kim was a person who reached the maximum level, which made him curious to know how strong she must be. Hyan explains that Gangu was actually infinitely stronger than her, and there was an explanation for that, but he refused to tell it to his irritation. Anyway, Daeong intended to set aside all this gang stuff for now. But speaking of Kim, something about all this seemed a bit off. Recently, the school had been quite quiet about Kim's disappearance. The teachers hadn't even mentioned it once since she left. The protagonist realizes that it was indeed true and wonders how that was possible. Even the time Gangu caused a scene at school, he ended up being pressured. There were many people around and not a single news about it spread. Somewhere else, a woman teleported after being summoned to the land. She sighed because it seemed too early for this to happen now, and she wondered why they had brought her there, all because of the loss of a mere dragon. At the end of classes, the protagonist made his way home. He was looking for articles regarding the events with his father, but saw nothing. Even after so much attention was drawn, still no one was talking about it. Gangu wasn't very familiar with SNS, but he wondered if there was anything on the sites. Suddenly, a voice appeared shouting for them to go home together. It was Jizin who appeared, commenting that he should stop being so lonely and at least start walking with her back home from now on. Gangu was confused about why she wanted to do such a thing so suddenly. Even asking if her house was this way, she ignored him. Instead, Gangu asked if she used SNS and she agreed that she did. She also had several followers and was quite famous on the internet. It wasn't that he was curious, but Jisoo enjoyed being with Gangu. She wanted his phone for a moment to add him on the platform. However, he replied that he was just wondering what the latest trends were. Maybe something about Gangu fighting an old man or something like that. Who knows, a city in destruction or something of that sort. Jisoo didn't understand anything he was talking about. They should just continue on their way. She asked if he was hungry and if they should stop somewhere to eat. The protagonist was just thinking that there really was nothing on social media, even though Gangu and his father had fought and caused a big commotion. There were many people watching and recording at the time, but it was still strange. There was no doubt about it. Someone with great influence was manipulating this situation. Watching the two of them walk together, some delinquents were talking among themselves. They would have never expected Jizin to get involved with someone like Gangu. She used to always stick close to Daeon because he was a good fighter. Now she was spending her time with this smelly loser otaku. No matter what others said to them, Daeon was still the best in school. They would never acknowledge the otaku, but even so, they still didn't understand what Daeon had been thinking lately. He had stopped hanging out with the delinquents and was even spending time with the otakus these days. Now that graduation was approaching, they didn't know what to say about it. Suddenly, a woman approached them to talk, commenting on how foolish they looked. The delinquents got irritated right away because they were called that. The woman asked what their problem was for having such a sour face. At that moment, the delinquents froze upon seeing how beautiful she was. She wanted to hear more about what they had been talking about just a moment ago. The two were captivated by how pretty she was and agreed to talk. This made her happy, but before anything, it wasn't anything that important. She had kind of overheard what they were talking about a little while ago. The woman wanted the opportunity to meet the guy they were talking about. They asked if it was about Daeong, and she replied that she had business with him. She hoped they could take the chance to call him right then, and she was satisfied because the two were kind enough to agree to help her. Meanwhile, Hyan was freaking out with anger because Daeon was following him. He just had a few questions to ask about the real world. Hyan didn't want anything to do with the delinquent, but he knew Hyan wouldn't do anything in the meantime. He was probably going to waste time while playing at home. While they were talking, suddenly Daeong received a call from Minsu, ignoring Hyan, who thought it was the perfect opportunity to get rid of the delinquent. He answered the call, asking what those idiots wanted with him. Minsu told him that they had actually found something incredible. There was a beautiful girl suddenly looking for him and wanted to meet him. Daeong couldn't care less, but Minsu assured him it was a real wonder. What he was doing now was infinitely more interesting than a woman, so he simply hung up on his friend without thinking twice. Hyan glared at him with a very furious expression, to Daeong's confusion. Meanwhile, Minsu sighed when he told the others that his friend refused to show up. They asked if she wouldn't like to spend some time with them instead. The woman ignored them, questioning if they were even friends with Daeong. When they agreed, the woman had fun thinking she could use them. If she turned them into a bloody mess, Daeong would probably show up. Suddenly, Daeong started receiving another call, which irritated him. They were being unbearable by calling him all the time. Hyan commented that it must be about that beautiful girl they mentioned. They were curious to see the woman's face because it was a video call. But when they turned on the camera, both were shocked by the scene, because it was footage of their friends destroyed on the ground. Then the woman asked if he was the powerful boy that had been mentioned before. She would give him 10 minutes to show up if he didn't do it soon. That all of his friends would be dead, which left both Daeong and Hyan surprised. It didn't take long for the two to run to where she was right away, even though they didn't even know who that woman was or what she wanted. It was absurd that she was actually threatening the lives of their other friends like that. Hyan could tell just by looking at her face that the woman was a player from the real world. When they arrived at the location, Daeong found his friends injured and the woman. The woman smiled upon seeing that they had really managed to get there, but Daeong was furious to see how his friends had ended up. He ran to check if they were breathing and tried to wake them up. That's when he noticed something strange. His friends were smiling but didn't seem dead. They were all lying on the ground with huge smiles on their faces and quite injured. The woman mentioned that she had left them alive, so there was no need to worry. But if they hadn't arrived in time, probably all of them would have perished. At that moment, the delinquent lunged at her to punch her in the face, but but she effortlessly defended herself, which took Hyun by surprise. Even though he was low level, she stopped his attack with just one finger. It was the most humiliating thing someone could do to show that the other was weak. She also dodged all subsequent attacks while laughing at his face, just letting Daeon fly away on his own in the midst of his own punches. Then the woman sighed, realizing he was just an average guy. However, she wanted to know if that was really all he could do. She grabbed him by the neck and lifted him, wanting to see if he was truly the strongest in the school. Daeon didn't understand where the strength of that woman's arms came from. His neck was ready to snap at any moment. The woman wanted to know if he had killed the dragon and the Death Knight with those skills. Hyun charged at her next to try to help Daeon. She easily dodged his attack, but then Hyun successfully let go of Daeon. This caught her by surprise because he was a bit faster than she expected. Daeon complained because he hadn't asked for his help and would have done it on his own. The nerd retorted that he was just talking a bunch of nonsense, especially to someone who had almost seen Jesus just a few seconds ago. The woman imagined that maybe the other should be the strongest guy in the school. Hyun said that if she really wanted to talk, she should explain why she was doing this. She seemed to be a player from the real world too, but she didn't know what that was. It seemed they would have a lot to discuss if they stopped for that now. But Hyun didn't believe for a second that she didn't know anything. There was no way a normal person could have that kind of power unless they were a player. Daeon then mentioned that this woman actually didn't seem human. This earned a laugh from her for his observations. Even without fighting, he could still see well. However, it was only because Daeon saw that she was too beautiful to be human. But obviously, she also had those horns on her head that drew attention. When she approached to attack him, he saw that they didn't seem like mere accessories. They were certainly growing from her head, and the woman agreed. As stated, she was not human, but of the demon race. Humans have been killing their monsters for a long time now, but those numbers have been increasing very recently. Not just the Death Knight and the dragon, but their goblins and fallen angels have been targets. This left both of them somewhat surprised because they were all monsters from the dungeons. When the woman saw that they both knew what she was talking about, she smiled. Now that she thought about it, whenever she searched for the aura of those who killed them, she always ended up being led directly to their school. Hyun asked her to wait a bit because this was wrong. Those should have just been mobs that appeared in the dungeon and nothing more. This made the woman furious, as they were clearly responsible for the deaths of the monsters. She charged at them, kicking Hyun in the face and sending him flying. Daeon didn't even have time to see if he was okay because he got punched right after. At that moment, he passed out. Hyun saw that he wouldn't withstand a battle. The woman mocked their efforts, unable to believe they killed monsters, being so weak. But since they had admitted the truth, she decided she would kill both of them with her own hands. Hyun still didn't fully understand what was happening, but he was sure of one thing. If he was hit by this attack, he would definitely die. The woman nonetheless wanted to know if he would have any last words, if he was going to apologize and beg for forgiveness because they killed her monsters. Then at least she could show mercy with a quicker death. Hyun laughed because he would end up dying one way or another. It was quite unfair. This made her laugh. He was going to die without even having a worthy girlfriend. He was a poor wretch. He ended up agreeing that it was true, but whether it was the Death Knight or anything else, not even the dragon, none of them were responsible for killing them. The woman was taken aback because he had previously mentioned hunting monsters, and she even suspected he was lying to avoid dying at her hands. Hyun explained that the goblins and fallen angels were known because they killed them. That was because they all appeared in quests within their game. But those guys were a challenge, and they needed the help of another person to defeat them. The demon didn't understand anything he was talking about, not about quests or games. Apparently, they needed another stronger person who ended them. She assumed it didn't make sense for someone of her level to take down that dragon. Hyun said that if she canceled her energy attack, she could call the one responsible for killing them now. This brought a smile to the demon because it was what she wanted from the beginning. Hyun himself didn't want to give up his friend, but he wouldn't have a choice. Gangu was much stronger and would probably handle everything more easily. Still, the demon used her thunder magic and opened a hole in the sky. All the clouds disappeared and Hyun froze in shock at what he saw. Not even Gangu would likely have been able to defeat her. After showing off, the woman suggested they should call her friend soon. Meanwhile, Jisung was out with Gangu, asking if he liked ice cream. The protagonist tried to distance himself from her because he was a bit busy that day. But this only irritated her because it was obvious that Gangu was trying to avoid her. Jisung was confused since Gangu had confessed to her he should want to be around. This drew a laugh from the protagonist because at the time he didn't know she was dating Daeon. Moreover, thinking about being near her at school would only make things more difficult. Suddenly, a loud explosion occurred and both of them were startled. Jisung turned around not knowing what had happened. It almost looked like a missile. But Gangu knew it wasn't anything like that. It was more like an energy explosion, the kind of thing that happened with monsters inside the real world in the dungeons. That's when he received a desperate call from Hyun. When he answered, Hyun mentioned that Gangu should have seen the explosion in the sky. It was supposed to have been an attack aimed right at Hyun and Daeon. This response clarified nothing, and Gangu continued questioning what was happening. Even Hyun didn't fully understand, but there was a demon woman behind him. So he asked Gangu to meet them and talk to her in person. She said she would kill them on the spot otherwise. After the call ended, Jisung asked why he was so distracted, and Gangu apologized because he would need to wait to have ice cream with her. This irritated her because she had wasted her time walking with him away from home, even though Gangu had never asked her to do any of this in the first place. However, he promised he would make it up to her another time. At that, he disappeared in the blink of an eye, running to where his friend was. Still trying to maintain the call, Gangu asked where Hyun was. He replied that they were near a large wall and guided him to the location. It didn't take long for them to meet, and even Hyun was surprised. Gangu's run was so fast that he had barely finished reporting his position. Hyan apologized for needing to call them to such a dangerous place. Then the demon approached, asking if it was Gang she had been talking about, and she greeted him even though he was merely a kid. Gangu asked who she was and why she had hurt his friends like that. However, she questioned him back, wanting to know why they hunted her monsters. She charged at the protagonist, who defended himself from her kick. The two exchanged a few blows, and she eventually got sent flying. Soon, she realized that Gangu was indeed the person she was looking for. He was different and stronger than those other two she had faced. It was the one who had killed the dragon and the Black Knight. Gangu was confused because they were all mobs he had killed in quests. The way the protagonist spoke only irritated her because it was all about games and fun for humans, even though those monsters were all her friends and they killed them all. She charged at the protagonist again, clearly furious, and Gangu asked her to wait a moment. They could stop and talk about this. At the rate things were going, the demon would destroy the city. He held her by the arms, suggesting they go to a place without people nearby. This caught her by surprise because Gangu's strength prevented her from pulling away. Gangu preferred that they could talk, but if she preferred to fight, they could continue, as long as it was in a distant place and didn't involve others. Sighing, the demon eventually agreed to go far away. She snapped her fingers and made a portal appear in front of them for them to use. Gangu asked where exactly they would be going, and the demon told him they should head to an isolated place. The idea was good, but the protagonist worried if it was really safe to go with her alone. Even Hyan had asked him not to do that because they didn't know where they were going. But between staying there fighting with the danger of involving civilians, Gangu ended up agreeing. Meanwhile, the gaming company was confused about what was happening. The explosion in the sky from a little while ago had still not been traced to its origin. They knew there were 3 players who lived nearby in that region, but none of them were capable of unleashing such a large magical power. Not to mention they were sure to have locked the levels up to 50 for safety. The team continued working to discover the source of that power explosion. Gangu's father was worried because it happened very close to his house. The manager, on the other hand, was smiling while doing her job. Later, Daeong ended up waking up when Hyan was waiting for him. He recounts that Gangu eventually showed up to help them take care of the demon. In a way, he ended up sending her to another place. When they were teleported, Gangu and the demon ended up in a destroyed, distant location. The protagonist saw that it was quiet and seemed empty. It was good enough. But somehow, it was a place that felt somewhat familiar. She responds that this place was known as the Demon Realm. Gangu asks how he could return to where he came from after the conversation, and she questions whether he really needed a way back if he was going to die right there. This draws a laugh from Gangu. She seemed quite determined to finish him off. In any case, the demon prepares to start the second round at the battle. However, the two stop when they notice something flying above their heads. It was then that Gang realized why this place felt so familiar. It was the same sensation he had when he was in the dungeons of the game. Ignoring that Gangu was getting distracted in thought, the demon launched her attacks, and thus the new battle between her and Gangu began with several energy explosions. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on
Waku Waku! Did you like the video? If you did, Anya wants you to smash that like button and subscribe. Comment below if you want to be reborn in another world. Anya will be happy to see it.